Council affiliates.
Curling
Okay, Chair, we are ready whenever you are to begin.
Thank you. I'll now call the February 18th, 2026 Planning Commission meeting to order. May I have a roll call?
Commissioner Bedard,
Here.
Commissioner Malakoff,
Present.
Commissioner McPhail,
Here.
Vice Chair Mead,
Here.
Chair Lee.
Yeah.
Let the record show all commissioners are present.
Please stand as you are able for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
Under God.
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Agenda finalization. Are there any changes to our agenda?
There are no changes, Chair.
Thank
I love
you.
the speaker.
Public comments. Will the clerk please read the statement of participation?
This is the opportunity for members of the public to comment on any items not appearing on the regular agenda. Because of restrictions contained in California law, the Commission may not discuss or act on any item not on the agenda, but may briefly respond to statements made or ask a question for clarification. The Chair may also request a brief response from staff to questions raised during public comment, or may request a matter be agendized for a future meeting. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes.
Thank you. Do we have anyone wishing to speak?
Do we have any? We have no one in the audience wishing to speak.
Thank you. Moving on, just a note that we don't have minutes to approve this at this meeting. So I'm moving to item 2, non-public hearing items. Item A, Development Code Update, discussion of Division 3, General Development Standards, continuing January 21, 2026, and Division 5, Subdivisions, and Division 7, portion of Planned Unit Development. Could I have a staff report, please?
Thank you. Good evening. Commissioners, Cynthia Schultz. I'm here just to introduce the item as has been our tradition. The consultant team is here. We have Brent Gibbons and Martha Miller here from our consultant team. They'll go over this. As you mentioned, it's a continuation of General Development Standards, which is Division 3, and then we'll introduce PUDs and subdivision, and they will tag team the topic for you this evening. Staff will be here to answer any technical questions and certainly participate in the discussion. But with that, I'll turn it over to the consultant.
Well, good evening, Planning Commission. Good to see you again. As Cynthia had mentioned, tonight is a continuation of our last meeting we had at the end of January. So we'll pick up where we left off at that meeting. We'll go through this series of questions as we have done so throughout this code update so far with the Planning Commission. Once we get through the remainder of what's known as Division 3, which is the General Development Standards, we'll switch gears and we'll talk about subdivisions and planned unit developments. And then that'll round out the evening, and then we'll talk about next steps and what to anticipate for your review coming up. For some of you, you'll see us in a week, and all of you will see us in 2 weeks. So, busy schedule ahead. Okay, so where we left off at our last meeting was we ended with the topic of shade, which was a wholesale new section. The Planning Commission provided a lot of feedback as it relates to the shade standards. We're currently working with your city staff to modify those and update those accordingly, and then bring them back in a public review draft form, which will be later this spring, early this summer. So we'd like to pick up with the section in Division 3, which is 9.70, which deals with parking. The parking section pertains to questions 25 through 27, and we're really focusing on provisions that get into maximum parking caps, whether on-street parking counts or could potentially count toward your parking ratio that you need to provide within the development standards. We get into bicycle parking, and then whether bike parking can actually offset vehicle parking, which is a little different. So the theme of this section is really to provide a parking section that reflects best practices from a planning perspective, reflects the current transit environment for Cathedral City, and is overall flexible. The city has a lot of parking as it is right now, and typically what happens is the community perceives that there is no parking. But if you actually look around, I was able to score a parking spot right out front tonight and have been here multiple times of the year, and there's a lot of commercial development with open parking. So how do we start to balance that with development and not overpark areas? And so as part of our task with this division was to take a finer look at the development standards, modify them, potentially lower parking standards for certain uses, and then provide some alternative forms of parking and different ways to measure it. So I would just say the key question, at least as it pertains to this first topic, is do the proposed parking standards strike the right balance between preventing an oversupply and supporting business operations? And whether we should look at parking maximum caps, whether we should look at allowing on-street parking to count towards your parking requirement, or if there are other methods that we should offset. So I'm going to hand this back to the chair to facilitate the discussion.
Thank you.
And staff as well as the consultant team is here to answer any questions.
Okay, let me just recap from our previous meeting. I think we touched on some issues then, one of which really was what parking we're really discussing in terms of residential and commercial, and the area between those two where residential abuts a commercial district, and how that changes what we need to do in terms of parking. And we also, I briefly touched on table 970-01 in the report. And my thought there was that it really needs to divide up between residential and commercial because they are two different kinds of parking. And also, we've listed just about every possible enterprise that could go on in the city in that table. It goes on for pages. And so I'm thinking it probably ought to also be simplified in some way so that it's clear, if you're bringing a new business, for example, to the city, what the requirements are. If you don't fit into one of those 100 categories, then what is the requirement for you? So I just wanted to think about that a little bit in terms of, I think the then director, now city manager, at that meeting said, residential areas are not really going to be a priority here in what we're doing. Was that correct? Was my understanding correct?
Yes.
Correct.
From the gallery. I know you are. And we can hear you even without a mic. So we're more concerned right now in this process with the commercial aspects and possibly that area that overlaps with residential. Would that be correct? Okay. I think one of the things that we were trying to do in our early discussions about parking was to, as you say, reduce the amount. And to do that, we also have to look at shared parking between enterprises. I would say that, yes, street parking has to be taken into account in order to produce the right amount. What I don't know is what the equation is to do that, whether street parking counts as 0.5 parking or whatever. Was there something that you were suggesting for that?
I will need to pull up the draft to confirm, but I think what we're looking to get feedback from the commission on is if that is even something that the city should consider at its fundamental level. We can talk with Public Works, engineering, and look at best practices to come up with a metric to be used. But if some communities, that's not a popular idea. So we're really trying to test the water here to see what you think fits best for the city.
Okay, thank you. Let me open it to the other commissioners.
We don't have any prohibition on valet parking, right? I mean, I know we don't, I've never seen it in Cathedral City. I know I've seen it in Palm Springs, but
It's just not called out, and so as part of this,
Okay,
it
but
was
we don't have there's no prohibition on,
not that I am
valet.
aware of, no.
so if we had a situation where a restaurant, let's say, didn't have enough parking, they could always get a valet stand and park off-street, yeah?
Our current code does not allow for off-street parking. Like,
Okay.
or, I mean, I'm sorry, on-street parking. So you have to park on-site, or else it's a
Okay.
variance.
So you can't do valet anywhere in the
On
city?
the current code, correct.
Okay, so would we need to then put that into the code, that it was allowed?
That's the discussion and the question
Okay.
before the commission, whether there's a appetite to allow on-street parking to satisfy part of your parking requirements, and the metrics of which can be determined working with staff. But
Okay, I guess to me, there's just a big difference between what we're talking about. If a project's going to be approved, how much parking they need to have versus someone's having a restaurant is overflowing because it's the season or whatever, and then they get a valet. Like, to me, that isn't something that would be part of their normal parking allowance. So I think, to me, they're two separate things, so yeah.
Yeah, I might add that you want to make sure that you don't take valet parking as cumulative. So a restaurant's going to have enough patrons, you're going to have enough parking. They may opt not to have valet sometime and may opt to, so you don't want a half-empty parking lot and the valet is using the street just as a matter of convenience because it's quicker, easier, and it's at a quicker location than behind it. I'm thinking of like El Paseo where it'd be easy to park it right in front of the restaurant versus right behind the restaurant, so.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that that was theoretically an option if we did restrict parking.
Other comments?
Yeah, I do have another question if no one else
Yeah,
does.
go ahead.
We haven't talked at all about mixed-use parking, really. So I know we're talking mainly about commercial, but if we did end up with a mixed-use development, typically there's some sort of division of parking where you've got, let's say you've got an underground garage, one shared parking lot where there's going to be a division where this is commercial parking and this is residential parking, and that's also for the security of the people who live in the building to make sure there's not random people walking through and having access to their vehicles. Is that something that I feel like I remember reading something about that somewhere in what we've looked at, but maybe not. Maybe that's in my head. Is that something we need to talk about? Do we have the typical, like, there needs to be a divider and it needs to be separated and different entrances, et cetera?
You're just talking about the parking facility itself?
Yeah, maybe it came up when we were looking at the different zone, like when we were looking at the urban, the mixed use, God, I'm losing my mind here. The zone and the downtown zone, maybe it came up in that. I remember reading something about parking and mixed use, but I'm just wondering, is that in this section or is that in another section?
Well, parking, and I mean, anything parking related would fall into this section of Division 3, so 9.70. I know previously in other meetings, we've talked about how to handle a site that has a multitude of uses, and rather than applying the parking standard to each individual use, you can apply it by total square footage. So instead of saying the restaurant has to have X spaces per seats and this retail space is X per 1,000 square feet, you just look at the totality of the square footage and apply a basic metric against that.
Right, but that would be like if it's one commercial development. I'm talking about if you have a mixed-use building where you've got, let's say, some restaurants and shops on the bottom, and you've got residential above, and they're sharing one, let's say, one level of an underground parking lot. Typically, there's a division, an actual divider. There's usually different entrances for commercial and residential.
I don't think we got down to that specific level, and it's not that we can't as
Okay.
part of this effort.
Okay. I think that's important to make sure we include, because you can run into an issue, especially in more downtown urban dense areas, so.
So I think that actually leads me to something else that I had in my notes. And I'm not sure where this fits. It probably doesn't actually fit directly here, but it's the concept of encouraging more covered parking and under-building parking. The Grove Apartments is a great example where they've put all the parking under the building. And I accept that increases cost for the builder. But it has a number of advantages. It's shielded from weather, it's more secure, it makes better use of the land, and particularly when we were talking about commercial buildings being, using more of the land, then having a standard for undergrounding some of the parking seems to me to be a great land use. So I don't know if that comes in here or if that comes out at something else.
So you're thinking of having the allowability of tuck under or subterranean parking, but not as necessarily a requirement? Would there be an incentive to do parking like that?
Well, I think, staff would have to tell us what incentives could be offered, but we were talking at the strategy session. I mentioned at the strategy session that, we need to develop carrot and stick principles for any changes we want in development. So,
Well, I think the only thing that I can think of at this point, and perhaps John can address this better, but when we're talking about incentives, you're going to have to probably put some pretty strong incentives in there. There's probably a 10-to-1 ratio in terms of cost between surface parking and structured, particularly where the building is on top of the structured parking. So it will take quite a hefty incentive in order to make the math work. I don't know that we're in a market where that will be taken up very readily. So I don't know that it's something that we really need to be concerned with. I don't know, John.
Well, and adding on to that, where's that incentive going to come from? Because it's monetary, because you come to the desert, where do you find underground parking? You don't. It's very rare. And underground parking occurs when land is so valuable. That's the best way to put it. Right now, the desert isn't that dense, so that's why you still see the surface parking, and it's rare occasion.
Isn't this plan supposed to potentially last for another 40 years?
Understood.
I mean, shouldn't we be thinking ahead?
Understood, but the incentive has to come in offsetting their construction cost, and where is that going to come from?
Yeah, I don't know about the incentive, but I'm just saying, I think if we do end up with being built out, if someone wants to put in a 5-story apartment building, to me, it seems like they're going to put the parking underground. Why
They're going to
wouldn't
put
they?
it in anyway, and we allow it. We've had proposals on buildings such as that right down in this downtown core, and they were proposing multi-level parking,
Yeah.
So not necessarily underground, but multi-level parking, like our parking structure type.
right, I mean, we have the example, as I said, of the Grove Apartments where they opted to do that. So they must have had a business incentive to do that in order to make that building viable. So I don't know what their position was and why they decided to do that, but they could have just said, we're not going to include parking. It will be, on another lot, adjacent lot or whatever. So,
I think if what you're asking for is to allow it, I think that our code would allow that. But I don't necessarily, short of having a fiscal incentive, I don't know that there's an incentive. And I don't think that we're in a position where, with the land economics that we have here, we might not be in a position to try to require it. So I think it's really a measure of market economics and construction costs and what the market will support. So in the Grove situation, you did see that, but on the Wren situation, you didn't. So, and they provided more than their fair share of more than their required number of shaded parking spaces. It has yet to be constructed, so that metric could change, but that was their proposal.
My concern is if it's allowed, which it sounds like it is, we need to have rules around it. If you're going to have mixed-use underground parking, there needs to be a division between residential parking and commercial parking. There should be, this from LA, there has to be. Otherwise, you have security issues, you have commercial use visitors taking residential parking. There has to be something in the code that says if we're going to have a shared underground parking lot. I would also say we maybe want to not allow podium parking where you have potentially 2 levels of parking. Imagine our parking garage over there with apartments on top of it. They were starting to do that in LA. Everybody hated it. It's terrible. It's horrible for the streetscape. So I think if we're going to talk about parking and where we might be 30 years from now, we should be putting some of that kind of stuff in the code.
yes.
Is this our only parking question, or, I mean, I don't want to jump out of context. but-
25 through 27.
Okay, so, summary of kind of things that I was concerned with. One is, I don't think street parking should count towards the total parking requirement, except in the downtown, where you have, downtowns are just special with that. Second, when you're calculating a total parking requirement, in a lot of the land uses for retail, restaurants, places of assembly, and I think hospitals, you were basing it on total square footage, but the actual generation of the need for parking comes from the service area. You know, the kitchen in the restaurant doesn't generate a need for parking. It would be the area where the seating is. The same thing, like if you have a Walmart, not the storage area, but the retail area where they actually have the sales. So I think you should take a look at that to make sure that it's fair, rather than on the gross square footage, on the square footage that actually generates the need for parking. And then you had a situation in the table that said that the retail couldn't, it had a maximum amount of parking, which I didn't understand why there'd be a maximum amount of parking, because in my experience, like Target and Walmart both like to exceed the parking requirement and have extra parking so that they can handle the holidays. So you would put a limit on the amount of parking that retail could have, and I didn't understand where that came from.
Sure, I can respond. Real quick, I want to circle back to what Commissioner Mead was talking about. I think that's something that we can talk with city staff about how to address mixed-use parking, the division of areas within a parking structure, underground parking, or it could even be a surface lot of a mixed-use development, and how we address that. So I do want to just recommend that we can take a look at that and also work with John as well to discuss that further. As it relates to the way that we calculate parking, we can look back, Commissioner Malakoff, at how the service areas are treated compared to employee areas. We can reevaluate some of that and bring back some other considerations for the commission. The rationale behind the parking maximum actually came out of our walking tours when we walked through commercial areas. Peak times on a weekend, the commercial areas, primarily along Date Palm down near Ramon, were almost completely open. The parking areas, yes, we're technically overparked. And part of the discussion we had with the walking tours at the time was it would be great to limit the amount of parking to allow more areas for development within the commercial corridors, pushing development closer to the street. Part of that would be to have a parking maximum, to limit the amount of parking on site. There is an understanding that there is 1 or 2 times a year that the parking can get tight due to holidays, but overall, the other 360 days would lead to ample parking, which also leads to other environmental concerns that was brought up through our workshops. We're talking heat island effect. That's where the shade portion came in. So this was our first crack at taking a stance on limiting the amount of parking, not oversupplying it, and that would apply to your retail areas.
Well, maybe then we should just consider, I understand what you said, and I think there's good sense to that, but maybe there should be like some kind of way that the director could look at when a big box comes in, because I would hate to lose the sales tax revenue of a big box because we wouldn't let them put in the amount of parking that they wanted to put in that exceeds the amount in the code. So maybe the director could have an administrative review to waive that requirement. Because I think the only issue, the only land use that really, the only type of retail that really would run into that problem would be a big box.
And that was actually one of the questions we were asked to consider, was should there be an administrative procedure if an applicant wants to exceed? And I think I would kind of agree, probably that should be looked at.
Then a question for our interim director. It's the first time we got to call you that. The boys club. So I read in the code, there was like, if they choose adjacent parking, it's like 300 feet. Did the boys club meet that requirement? Was it within 300 feet?
I'm going to suspect that it is, but I have to verify that only because there is that caveat of within 300 feet.
Yeah, if that came from what we have now, then, because I thought that worked. So I was just curious if that was consistent with it. So whatever we did there, I thought that was fair and it worked. And then the last parking thing, and I submitted comments, but the last question I have on parking is, I didn't see any excuse me, I'm sorry. Overhang, that's the word I was looking for. So a lot of times when you have a tight parking area, the parking is 9 by 19 normally, but sometimes they allow a 1-foot overhang into the planter if there's a planter there. And I didn't see any language on that. So I was wondering if to give a little bit more flexibility, that we could have a 1-foot overhang.
Isn't that already in the code?
It's in the code currently.
Yeah, it's already in the code. So if you have a wheel stop, then obviously you're not dealing with an overhang. But if you do have an overhang, you have to allow, that's an extra 2 feet before pedestrian travel could be in that area.
So is that it? That's in the proposed code?
So if you
or the
have a
current
5-foot sidewalk and you want an overhang for vehicles just to come right up to the curb line, you have a 7-foot sidewalk technically.
I
A
wasn't,
good example of that is Denny's at Landau, up near Vistachino and Landau. That Denny's, when they did they wanted the perimeter walk around. We had them extend it because they didn't want to put wheel stops in. And so we said, okay, you have to extend it 2 feet for
But
the
I
bumper
was more
overhang so you're
thinking-
not bumping into it as a pedestrian.
I was more thinking like if you had a double row of parking and a 5-foot planter or a 7 or 8-foot planter in between, would you be able to have an 18-foot long parking space with a 1-foot overhang into the planter?
So I would say that's something we can look at. I've worked in cities where we did allow that overhang, and it always comes down to making sure then what the plant material is going to be and the maintenance of that plant material. And so we'll take a look at that and see if that's something that can.
It's just something that makes it, especially when you have a very tight area and you're trying to put in landscaping, it gives you a little bit more flexibility. And that's all I have.
Just a couple of small comments, I guess, in relation to the questions that you asked us. I'm personally supportive of the idea of a maximum cap. I think, as you said, from our walking tours and just my, 2 and a bit years of living here, my impression is that we do seem to have an awful lot of large, half-empty parking lots. And I think that the idea of a maximum cap for the future seems like a good way to go. The other question we haven't really talked much about was 27, which was in relation to bike parking in particular. And I think in the table 9.7002, which I don't have right in front of me right now, but I guess it mentioned 4% of the number of vehicle spaces being suggested as a bike parking for museums and places of assembly, which kind of sounded a bit high to me, but I imagine it's based on maybe what other cities are doing, whereas other uses, like it said public use is 2%, and obviously at least one space is a minimum. So I wasn't quite sure about the 4% versus 2%. I don't know what the magic figure is, but obviously some should be provided, but it sounded like why should, and also in this environment, how many people are cycling in 150 degrees to get to a museum? Is 4% a bit high for this particular environment that we live in? I don't know.
Well, these are always starting point
Yes.
metrics, and this is part of the reactionary reason why we come to the Planning Commission. So if the 4% is seen as too high, we can align it consistently with some of the others that are 2%. I also think part of looking at the bicycle parking and the use of bicycles in this environment, we have to be realistic about what would the commute for a bicyclist be in Cathedral City? Probably not really high. The environment really isn't conducive for it, but state law requires that you have bicycle parking, and it was something that we had discussed with staff that is still an important consideration for modern best practices within codes, that we include this, but we can always reevaluate the 4.
And there might have been something in the text or within a question where maybe there was a suggestion of letting developers substitute bike spaces for regular vehicle parking spaces. I'm not sure if that's a good idea, again, for this environment, but we certainly should have them for public uses like museums and schools and commercial centres. But I'm not sure about that part about substituting bike spaces for regular spaces.
I didn't know if you would like to add something to that conversation.
No, and I think what we're talking about is very important. This plays into what Vice Chair Mead stated, because if we're looking to the future, we got CV Link and it's increasing ridership every week. Electric bikes, obviously we want the kind that are less than 20 miles an hour that'll be allowed on CV Link, are going to get more popular. And so that bike parking becomes more. And I was just going to state that these are dynamic. You got to set starting points and set them. They're not forever. If we see that there's a deficiency, we can always add to it. With bicycles, it's real easy to add bike spaces, bike racks, take out a parking space and add more bike spaces in there. So you're in a time when there's a lot of different changes. And related to the big box, if it comes in, that special occasion, not only if you have the director have the ability to, make adjustments, they can always solicit to the commission a variance. And that's what your jobs are, to look at certain times when it's a special occasion, because you put everything in a box, it's also the popularity of that box. There might be something that's the hot item, it's going to be crowded for the first 5 years, and then it diminishes in it, and that's what you see, these parking lots that are empty because, the Walmart was gone, and Walmart was extremely popular at the time. And then now you go to Walmarts and there's empty spaces, and they're trying to fill it by saying, let your motorhome, you could park your motorhome there overnight and do things. So it's dynamic. So you got to not feel like you're compressed for the next 40 years, but it's good looking in the future, but make some decisions now and we can always toggle them.
So I agree with everyone else on the issue of bikes. I mean, it is increasing. We have some excellent bike routes that we've added to Perez and other roads. So we're getting those grants for adding that infrastructure, and people will need places to park those bikes when they get somewhere. One thing that occurs to me is we ought to have some standard, particularly about shading for bike racks and areas. Because as others pointed out, we have high temperatures during the summer. So anything that encourages the use of the bikes is a good idea. The other...
Just adding to that encouraged the use of the bike rack, because if there's a tree there and there's a bike rack here and it has no shade, they're going to go hitch their
Well,
bike
just
to a tree. So
Before you move
that's
on
actually
from
a
the
good
bikes,
point.
though,
Yeah.
I did want to say, I think it's important that we do have some minimum standard for what is a quality bike space, though. Because you do see in a lot of urban areas, developers get away with just dropping like one of those, it's just like a stick with like a little circle on it, and then it's in the middle of the sidewalk, which is not good for pedestrians. So I think we want to, make sure they're quality bike spaces so that people will actually use them.
Well, and I think Parks has had some input on that before. Deanna used to have various designs of bike racks that were placed around the city. So I assume that still falls under Public Works.
It does, but it also falls under developers, as
Okay.
the planning department reviews every project. They do look at if there's a need for
Right.
bike racks on there and they.
Yeah, I agree. They need to be practical. Even better, although that would be up to businesses, probably offices. I know some offices do that now. In urban areas, they provide lockable bike covers so that, there's a door that you can get in and put your bike in. So anything like that is,
So we can definitely look into those standards in our zoning code when we look at the update. And this is a great conversation, but we have a lot to go over. And I think we got the sense of the questions being answered.
I would like to just say
Sure.
something since I haven't yet.
You don't have all the time in the
There we
world.
go. Just in revisiting the valet issue, I know it's not considered an issue now, and I really appreciate the mention that there's a lot of parking here in our little downtown core, and that's going to change very quickly. And the plethora of parking is not near the businesses. So like, I wanted to bring my mother down here, and my mother can only walk 50 feet or so, and so I could not find parking. I had to drop her off, have her stay. There's no place to sit. There's no place for her to be. Leave her on the corner, go park my car, run back to be with her. So valet could have been helpful. And one of my favorite little restaurants, which is actually in Rancho Mirage, but Willie's has valet parking right there. And a lot of the older patrons who need that, they have a little lot set to the side. Willie's is plenty of parking, so they're not street valeting. They have a little lot set to the side that people who want to valet can go right there. It's literally 20, 30 feet. But if you have an older population that's coming in and they're parking and they can walk through the door, but they're not going to get through the 40 feet or whatever from the car to the entrance, it's a consideration. And our downtown is growing really fast. We have those apartments that are coming in. We have the townhouses that are coming in. We just had all the drive-throughs and all that type of stuff put in. Space is going to go quickly in our next 10 years. So to have a possibility for the valeting, we can decide if it's street or not or however that is, but I think that is something really important to offer. And that's my only feedback.
thanks. So I appreciate time is sensitive, but I have one other item that,
Sure,
that I want to bring up. And that's just to mention that it would be useful, considering not only are we moving to more bikes, but also to more electric vehicles, that we have some kind of incentive to ensure that actual charging stations are included in large parking lots. So I would like to see some mention of that as well.
Yeah, beyond just the basic infrastructure level,
Right.
that they actually do something.
An actual charging point, yes.
Agreed.
And, something that, like we have in the garage here in the structure.
Yeah, and you got to be sensitive to the fact that you can have the concession put in charging stations, and whether they're going to get used or not's another story. Just to give you a little background on our charging stations.
I'm not sure that we have time.
So no, we understand the comment. The EV charging stations do fall under the building code. We're cognizant of that. We've been talking internally about how to better achieve what the building code is after so that we can look at it comprehensively and from an entitlement standpoint to ensure the built product is what we want as far as charging stations.
All right.
And just comment, the ones in the garage, they're down 75% now that they're for pay.
Well, that might be partly because it doesn't actually say how much they cost on the unit, but that's a whole different discussion.
Yes.
So, moving on.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. The parking discussion was very robust. So a lot of good stuff we can talk with staff about and bring back in a revised draft. Next section we wanted to talk about pertains to questions 28 through 29. This has to do with fences and walls, looking at front yard fence height limits, whether fences and walls should be required, separation standards between incompatible uses, types of materials that are allowed, and so forth. So the theme of these questions focus on residential wall standards really looking at providing standards that are flexible, but then also balance the safety and privacy of neighborhood character within the city. So part of the key questions that we have for the Planning Commission tonight, which are question 28 and 29, are the proposed fence and wall standards appropriate for residential areas in particular? Should we look at modifying height limits for providing adequate security? And then are there any other questions as it relates to fencing standards for commercial or mixed-use areas and the division of uses? So I'll hand it back over to the chair. Any questions you have, both city staff and the consultant team is here.
And I'll be pretty brief in my comments. I did mention to staff about, and it looks like the steering committee have also looked at, I don't know if it's the acronym CPTED, Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. So lower front walls, 42 inches, typically good for security, for gates should be in some way see-through, so you can't block off the complete entrance and people hide behind it. So all those kinds of standards, I understand, are being discussed, yes? All right, okay. And then the only other thing that I had to mention was that with sidewalls, with 6-foot walls, we had various discussions on our walk around about ensuring that they are attractive, they're less likely to attract graffiti, so architecturally interesting, less like a prison. So I think we need those kinds of standards. And incidentally, although it's not that part of the discussion, I think you and I, anyway, had a discussion on our walks that it's also good if there is space to have the walk area, the sidewalk, and then some kind of greenery or whatever. It separates the walker from the traffic. So those are the standards that came to mind on that.
I think it was a planting strip.
Planting strip, that's a good term for it. We'll use that. Okay. Other comments? Yes.
The only thing of consequence that I was curious about, the only thing of consequence that I was curious about, and I don't know that it comes up that much in Cathedral City, but it was in your proposal. So if you have a sports court, like a tennis court, usually they have a maximum height. And the way that you wrote it, there was no maximum height. It was like a percentage or something. So I was thinking that, like in all the codes I've seen, most of the time a tennis court has an 18-foot fence. And I don't think you would have a need to have like a 24-foot high fence for a sports court. And so that was my comment.
Other comments?
Yeah, just quickly.
Yes.
So I think it's of the unpopular opinion, but I'll say it. I was disappointed when the residents that wanted to put the wall up around their front patio we had that variance request. I certainly don't want a walled-in community, which I know was your concern, and I would not want walls put up to the street. Now, apparently you can build an ADU right up to the street, which is a giant wall. And I wonder if there's a way to find a happy medium where something like, hey, I want to put up a wall that's a privacy wall that gives me that experience, there's a difference maybe in how it is and where it's placed. Like it has to be within 6 feet to the front of the house. Like that wall can only come out from the property 6 feet. It can't be at the curb, or it has to be so many feet. Instead of that 20-foot setback from the curb, maybe it's 10. So you still can see the house, you could still see the front door, and these rooms that are bedrooms provide fire privacy with a higher degree wall. And if you want a smaller degree wall, then if you're closer, the closer you get to the property line in the front, the smaller the wall goes down. Where there's more flexibility for things like that. And I know as we get more dense, especially if we're looking at this years ahead, and you go to the communities that are right around us, I live right on the edge of Cathedral City, and the majority of the houses that are near me in Rancho Mirage are walled in up to the curb. Now, I don't want that, but it is the higher the income, the higher the class level of the area, the more privacy, the more walls, the more hedges, the less you see a front door, right? So as far as attracting affluence into our city, that's what the people that are going to want to build a more higher end, nicer, less track home are going to want to have that degree of privacy. So if there's a way to actually, oh, well, yeah, you want to put a wall in front of your bedrooms, you can only come out 6 feet, that patio is limited, that's it, it can't be at the curb level. Like, if there's a way to provide a happy medium for that type of thing, I think it would be much more productive, especially with all the older, our homes are getting older quick. Like my home is already 60-something years old, which for a young city is pretty advanced, right? So as people are going to be coming in and remodeling and fixing up and changing neighborhoods, it would be nice to have more flexibility on that. That was my
Yeah,
only
I mean, in Panorama, it's actually, at least on my street, I can say there are a lot of people who have the low walls, which I think are the 42-inch, that do go all the way out basically to the sidewalk. And then they have an enclosed front yard, which they will sit out and use. It's the same way they would use their backyard, right? And so they have some privacy. A lot of them do have on top of the wall, they have some metalworking, right, which makes the wall higher and for security purposes, but you can see through it. So, I mean, I think, you know, allowing, and I think I had in my notes from the steering committee, allowing some sort of transparent extension above the 42 inches seems reasonable to me. So you have more security, but still have that visibility. And I also, I think I had in my notes too, that walls that are backyard and side yard walls, to me, it seems less important. The height restriction seems slightly less important because a lot of people have hedges that are going to be much taller than 42 inches anyway. So like the height of the wall almost is meaningless at that point, I think. Yeah, I think that's it.
That's my.
Okay, any further comments on that?
One other thing, yes, that I had. When we did the walking tour, that was over by Veterans Village, and there were some houses in that area that did have, you know, the sidewalk just basically like dirt, and then a concrete block wall that wasn't painted, it wasn't treated, and no landscaping. And I think everyone on the tour was kind of like, this isn't very inviting. So I know a lot of people were saying either the wall should need to be painted, or there needs to be a landscape requirement there between that wall and the sidewalk, something to beautify it, make it look a little nicer.
Okay,
Moving on.
thank you. Section 9.80. You'll notice there are no questions for the Planning Commission. The city staff and consultant team discussed this topic. We didn't have any specific questions for you to monitor, but it is still a section that we wanted to open up the floor to the commission. If you had any comments or suggestions for this section in particular.
Thank you. I had some minor comments. I've already sent them to you.
I received those, thank you.
So they were mostly detailed questions about, there's one item here, 98020A3. I just didn't understand why it was there. But I think we can address those separately if you prefer.
We can do it either way. You can either address it in the planning commission meeting, or you can address it post with staff.
Okay, well.
Either way.
Well, there's only a few points, so it's pretty quick. This was talking about exceptions, and generally speaking, I don't like exceptions. So this one's, so A3, so 980.020A3, I was wondering, what is the situation that's envisaged there where we couldn't provide an enclosure for a trash can? it says containers of any size, provided the container is painted to blend into the surroundings, is exempt from having an enclosure. And I don't understand why. Why would that make a difference?
Well, I think part of the enclosure is a visual blight. And so having the actual units themselves, if it's not within an enclosure, blend into the environment is some of the concern we were hearing from community members, is not liking to see the trash or recycling bins in the front yard and they stand out or they're not shielded. And so part of the exception here is if it is painted to blend into the surroundings, it's less of a visual obstruction on the property if it's not behind a screening or another enclosure.
I guess my question was, why wouldn't we simply require that there would be a nicely designed enclosure in that case?
In some instances, it might not be feasible on the site to have an enclosure depending on the side yard or where the units are placed. So there was a discussion at the city level, and city staff may want to weigh in on this as well, was that in some instances, some properties, the way that they're currently built out, there isn't a place to have a actual trash enclosure placed. Even depending on the side yard. We had talked about with the Planning Commission reducing the side yard setbacks. Sometimes that's where your trash enclosures would go and it wouldn't fit. And so that's where this exception does come into play.
I think also, for the commission, we talked last time about making it more clear when we're talking about a residential standard and a non-residential standard. And so, for instance, the example that Brett's giving is if we have a residential home, and the trash enclosure, or excuse me, the trash bin, the trash container can't fit in the side yard, maybe there's some exception to painting or something like that. But I think for a non-residential commercial site, the question is, do we want bins without enclosures and painted? So I think there needs to be a little bit more of a distinction here. And Shirley, I think what I'm hearing is that the concern with this exception is more geared towards commercial uses. Am I hearing correctly? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that would be the case. And maybe it's just an administrative choice rather than a complete exception, So you may you may allow that administratively, and I don't think that's an issue because there's some exceptional condition. Right now, it just says exceptionally, if you paint your trash can, you don't have to put it in the enclosure.
Right.
See, so, okay, but leave that with you. 984040E. My comment there was just, there should be, this is addressing a separate entrance to the trash enclosure. And I'm just wondering if we can make that, what do they call it? Vestibule access, so that people don't have to struggle with a gate and trash, or if you're ADA, you can get in and out more easily. So you make a vestibule entrance and not a gated entrance. That's just a suggestion. Okay. Yeah. 984040G. So I would just wanted to be clear. So it's talking about covers, and of course, the trash receptacles for commercial are usually hinged. They have a big lid, so I guess they need probably a 6-foot clearance above. So we're talking about a suspended roof above the enclosure. It wouldn't be sort of solid walls up to 14 feet or whatever.
We can discuss that because you do have to have your roof enclosure covered for water quality issues.
Right.
But what happens sometimes is we have had requests where builders wanted or developers wanted to also provide some obstruction from that opening because of illegal dumping into the enclosures. And so when you see that it's not just an open area between the top of the enclosure and the roof, it's because they're trying to limit that occurring. Yep.
Okay. So, yes.
The just real briefly, the enclosures at the Starbucks, the new Starbucks in the Cathedral Cove, that really should be the gold standard. I mean, those look really good.
Okay, that was all I had on trash. Moving on.
Okay, questions 30 through 31, these focus on screening, so section 9.85. Focuses on outdoor screening applicability, small businesses, there are some exemptions for lower intensity uses, and then when existing non-conforming sites should be required to add perimeter screening. What does that trigger? So the theme of this section focuses on outdoor storage standards and then applies a fair compliance. So there's a equity piece tied to this. I think the question for the commission is, do the outdoor screening standards appropriately target high-impact storage without unintentionally burdening smaller businesses and lower intensity businesses specifically? And when should existing sites be required to add missing screening or perimeter screening to the site? What are those triggers? What is that expansion? And what is an equitable and fair way to provide that within the community? So I will hand it back to the chair to facilitate any questions you may have.
Thank you. Questions from commissioners or comments? No? It's very quiet up here all of a sudden.
I was just going to say, I think that there should be a distinction between screening that's required to maybe buffer sound versus screening that's required for visual purposes. So I would, when you're asking about triggers, if there was a existing building and the use changed from something that had very little sound to something that maybe is now going to be allowed use, that maybe then that could trigger some sort of sound buffering that would fall under screening, I guess. In the same way that you'd put like screening around equipment on the roof of a building for sound purposes.
My comments only related really to your question 31, existing properties that don't have required perimeter screening, and when should it be added? And I think, as with a lot of these issues, it needs to be a question of when we trigger that. Shade, I think we came to a trigger point of 50% of an upgrade would require them to upgrade all of that or to fix that. It seems to me something like that is appropriate here too. Yeah. Yeah, other than that, no. Okay. We're done.
Section 9.90, this deals with accessory structures, so questions 32, 33, and 34. So this section focuses on accessory structure setback encroachments, specifically residential areas, storage container classifications and standards, and whether these standards should differ depending if it's residential, mixed use, commercial, or more of an industrial office area. Overall theme, accessory structures, how to permit them, where they go, where can they encroach within a given setback that's determined by your zoning district provisions. So the key questions that we have here for the Planning Commission, again, are the proposed accessory structure and container standards clear? Are they appropriate? Are they flexible? Are they not rigid enough? And should we focus on how storage containers should be classified and regulated? Basically looking at the difference between, is it temporary or is this something that is a permanent use on the site? And whether commercial districts should warrant different height or location standards for accessory structures compared to residential areas, which I think is a good question that I would like to hear some feedback from the commission on. I hand it back to the chair.
Thank you. I have more notes for this one, so I won't be quite as quiet. My first thought was, what is our rationale for having a setback in the first place? And my assumption is that that is privacy, emergency services, spacing of development to give a sense of community, and fire breaks. Those would be main reasons. Are there others staff would add?
Just interface between adjacent uses. Sometimes we provide some additional privacy.
Right,
separation.
yeah, yeah.
We also have utility easements in those setbacks.
I'm sorry?
Utility easements within those setbacks.
Oh, okay, right.
And Chair, if I may just real quick, I want to make a clarification here that this applies to accessory structures, garages, sheds of the sort, but not accessory dwelling units. Those are
Right.
governed separately with the new ordinance that went forward.
Right, right. So, given that list of reasons for the setback, then I would oppose encroaching into that area if at all possible. I think there needs to be a really strong reason for doing so. And I'm not quite sure what those reasons would be. So I would think that maybe this is something that comes down to what we've done in other cases where 10% encroachment might be administrative and otherwise it would come back to the Planning Commission for a discussion. So that would be my thought on the encroachments. On that issue, other comments? Yes.
My only comment, I agree with what you just proposed. When you're dealing with the corner cutoff, which is really important for safety, in the flagpole section, I think there's a loophole that they could put the flagpole in the corner cutoff. And I think that should be prohibited so that you have a clear view when you're leaving a property or entering.
And I can see where you are noting that. And that's something that we can discuss with city staff and clear up the language as not to interfere with that setback
There might
area.
be, I didn't see it, but there might be an overall prohibition against anything in the corner cutoff. Any landscaping more than 3 feet or something like that. There might be that somewhere. And at this point, I don't know if I read that in your proposal or some other code that I read.
Generally
is-
speaking, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, generally speaking, we have a clear zone. It's a site distance triangle, and it's defined not only just by that triangle on the ground, but also that space, like you're talking between 3 feet and 8 feet or 10 feet. That clear zone as you're driving or approaching that corner that you can see.
Yeah, that corner cutback shouldn't have anything in it. Because that cutback, the portion that's facing the street is dedicated to the city as part of the right-of-way.
But I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea to cross-reference the section on the corner cutback here, just so it's clear. Because I think the purpose of bringing these documents forward to the Planning Commission is where you're reading it from your perspective and you think through your review that there maybe is a lack of clarification. It's important to point out, and I think that's one area that we can bolster.
Let me move on to your question 33. I wasn't quite sure whether there were any state laws or restrictions on this matter, but assuming that it's legal, seems to me like a storage container is now actually quite a popular method for providing primary residences. And so we need to consider those as an alternative building structure.
And I'll probably defer to Interim Director Molina on that. I mean, the building code does regulate the types of structures, so it'd have to meet building code, but I don't think that we're necessarily prohibiting the use
Right.
of storage containers for habitable use. It just
No,
has
I
to
know.
meet standards.
We had a presentation about this recently about alternative building structures, and I think that would fit in with all of that, wouldn't it?
Yes, provided they can demonstrate the building code's met, yes.
Yeah, okay.
But I
So-
do think for the purposes of this section, it's not so much the container being used as a habitable structure like an ADU. This is truly for storage purposes, whether it is
Right.
permanent or temporary.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that this could easily be permitted as a residence. Certainly, I think they need to blend into the surroundings. When used as a storage unit, if it's in a residential location, for example, it would need to blend in. In terms of commercial storage, it seems to me that would be subject to different regulations. Plain old shipping containers are extremely strong and designed to stack. So we would need to look at, should they be allowed to go up to the height of the commercial building, for example?
Right.
And maybe that would be the limitation. So if you have a 30-foot tall building, then you could stack 3 containers.
So just to step back a little bit,
Yeah.
currently in our code, we only allow storage containers on a temporary basis. Like, let's say your home flooded and you have to have somewhere to put your furniture while the restoration work's being done. And so we do allow that, or if somebody's moving temporarily on construction sites. And so the question that we're asking is, do we want to continue to allow it on a temporary basis, or do we want to have some process or provisions to allow it on a permanent basis? Right now, we don't allow it on a permanent basis. So let's say I have a business and I have a lot of inventory and I want to be able to put up a C-train storage container and use it permanently. That type of use would the city, or excuse me, would the commission be open to having us explore?
Yeah, no. So the thought was that if it's permissible for a building material anyway, and if it blends in with the surrounding, then it's not really any different to a bonus room in a house. It's just more storage space, I mean, a lot of people turn their garage into a storage space and park out in the street or on the driveway. So I'm not seeing a huge distinction personally.
Could we get some clarification? Because when you say storage unit, do you mean like a shipping container, the metal?
Yes.
That's specifically what you're talking about? Okay, I would not be for that being a permanent. I think if someone needs permanent storage, there are plenty of alternative nice sheds that look much nicer, that can be insulated, that can be put on a concrete slab. Like, I would be wary of allowing businesses especially to have stacked, basically shipping containers in our, that to me does not seem like a great idea.
There is an example of that in Palm Springs. If you're familiar with the Play Lounge, it's Social Cafe Play Lounge that's on Tuckheats, but almost across from City Hall in Palm Springs. One of the businesses there has a storage container in the parking lot, painted the same color and directly next to, pushed up right against the trash enclosure. It's only a single storage container. I see them whenever I go out there. I see them regularly entering out and using that, getting stuff in and out for whatever the business is. It's very unassuming, and I didn't even notice it for the first few months because it's just painted the same color. It's right up against. It's not free floating, right? It's right there, and I don't see a problem with that. I understand. I see the problem with how you're describing it. Right. In this particular instance of how I've seen it actually used, and it's in a commercial zone, I certainly wouldn't want that in a residential zone. But in a commercial zone, it was done well, and it seems to work fine for the environment that it's in.
Yeah, so then maybe we just have some sort of guidelines as to what we want to allow versus just someone dropping because what you're describing sounds fine to me, right? So I think I was envisioning the worst case scenario, and there is a best case scenario, so maybe if we have some sort of guidelines, yeah.
Well, I think the whole intent of the storage containers was, that they be something temporary and seasonal at the worst. And if you don't have enough room, I mean, I support business, but if you don't have enough room, and you're doing that well, maybe it's time to find a larger space. But I just don't think storage containers should be something that's ongoing. But I certainly understand it during the holidays or during some kind of increased activity, that you apply for a permit and get it. And I don't think it should be more than one level. I think that's, taking advantage of the situation, but it's something that should be temporary. And in the residential, as Vice Chair Mead was talking about, you might have a pod in your driveway during a remodel, which of course is temporary, but if you shouldn't have like a storage container in your rear yard, you can go get a tough shed.
Right.
And that would look a lot better. And if it's, depending on how big it is, you may not even need to get a building permit. If it's under,
149.
thank you. If it's under 149 square feet, you don't have to get a building permit. So these things should be temporary.
Yeah, I tend to agree with both sides here, but what I was saying about residential location was that it should blend in, but also I think it would be appropriate. I don't see a difference between a tough shed and any other storage unit in the backyard of a house.
A tough shed could look like a dollhouse.
Well, it doesn't look like anything from the outside, one hopes. The people at the building are going to see it. But it has, if you think about it, it has some advantages. If you buy a steel unit and put it in the backyard, it won't burn. Tough sheds are made of plastic, so they do burn. So, I see that we could come up with some sensible rules about how they could be applied in a residential area.
I'm definitely more on the side of the temporary function of storage containers, particularly in residential areas. If there's some rules we can come up with, a la the place in Palm Springs that Commissioner Bedard mentioned in terms of commercial areas, perhaps. But yeah, I think there's other ways of making storage in a residential area than a big rectangular structure. So I would be in favor of temporary here.
So if go ahead.
No, I was going to go in a different direction, so you.
Okay. So I did want to visit the shed in question 33 with just that idea of, I believe sheds, if you're going to be installed properly and according to code, they have to be 4 feet from the setback, from the wall, from your perimeter wall. I've never seen that in all my friends I've visited and all the homes I've been to and all the house tours and stuff I've been on. That shed that's maybe 10 by 10 or smaller is right up against the wall. And you lose so much of your yard space when that shed is properly done, when it's 4 feet or whatever out of the setback and that. And then you have this wasted space. And if it's only a 10 by 10, I don't think it's a fire hazard. I don't think people need to get around it. I don't know. So I'm just curious, like my neighbor has a shed and it's right up against the back, our shared wall, and I'm perfectly fine with it. And I don't think anybody needs to get behind it. I don't think there's any emergency crew. Now, if it was in the setback between the house and the wall, right? And you need to make sure you have clearance between the shed itself and the exterior wall of the house. But to have clearance behind the shed as well kind of is a waste of square footage to me for when it's a structure that is so small. So I'm curious if because I know the way we are right now with our rules is that it has to be set back.
And I think that may be a larger question for city staff. Right now, there's a separation from the primary structure and there's a separation from parcel lines. It's a 5-foot separation.
A
The
5 foot,
parcel
not
line
4.
is a 10-foot separation from the primary structure if it's a detached enclosed accessory structure. I know there are separation requirements for building code that come into play. Did you want to elaborate on some of the other?
So I understand the point that's being made, and we can go back and look at that with our staff. But yeah, there's building codes that come into play when it gets too close to the property lines.
Yeah, and I'm just saying I don't know how practical that is.
I understand the usability, the loss of usability area that you're bringing up. A 10 by 10 typically doesn't need you don't need a building permit, you don't need a zoning clearance, so they don't come into us. And so that's why you end up seeing them closer than they're supposed to be. But we can talk to our building department about that and look to see if there's any relief from that for,
I can get it if it's an accessory dwelling unit, if it's like some extra, that's a house, like a living space or something of that sort. But if it's just a place for you to put your lawnmower, your garden tools, or, some extra storage of all those tax files that you have to keep for 8 years, nobody knows where to put them or that type of thing. And it is within that 149, but below that 149, and it's not then creating some sort of safety fire hazard, which I don't see how it would, but maybe somebody can tell me how it would. I don't see how that is especially if we're encouraging people to take garage spaces and convert garage spaces, and there's all these other JADUs and ADUs and all this type of stuff that's going to be taking up the land itself, to have that shed eating up space where people would have outdoor space, family space, that type of thing. It seems impractical.
let us look at that, because the thing with, once you start getting closer to property lines, is there may be some fire resistive construction standards that come into play. So we'll need to look into that.
All right, thank you. Yes.
It's my understanding that the setback in the building code for the accessory structures came from a safety reason for fire, and it had to do with what you were just saying. I don't think a shed has to have like a 1 hour firewall, and I think that's where the 5 foot setback came from, when you have a fire that jumps from property to property. But on the other side of the coin for this is that people do what Commissioner Bedard was talking about all the time. And what happens is it's code enforcement, rarely, if ever, unless there's a complaint, will go out and do anything about that. So, it's one of those situations where there is a building code requirement, but the reality is nobody follows it for the sheds that are small.
Okay.
Can I
Thank
ask
you.
a
And
general-
yes.
Just a general question about accessory structures. So, because you're saying accessory structures and storage containers, they're separate things, right? So we had that clock tower that hid the the cell tower, right? If the church had just wanted to build a giant clock tower on their property that's not attached to the building and serves no storage purpose, is that an accessory structure? Like what falls under accessory structure other than storage, I guess is my question.
Well, accessory structure could be playground equipment, could be a whole host of things. A clock tower that's very specific.
It's only a clock tower because we were trying to come up with a nice way to hide the cell tower. So they enclosed it and put a clock on it, which will be a functioning clock. But I'm saying if they had just decided to build that, is that an accessory structure? I guess.
If it was detached, it would be an
Totally
accessory.
detached. It's like 80 feet away from
It
the
would be
building.
an accessory structure, yes.
Okay.
Yes, if it had a wireless component, then no.
Right.
It would just be a screening or stealthing.
But so any structure that's not part of the main, that's not attached to the main building is going to be an accessory structure, even if it's not for storage.
As defined.
Yeah, okay.
As defined. And the reason why we separate, a storage container is still an accessory structure. There's just specific standards applied to it. Just before we move on from this topic, I do want to point out that in the draft before you, there are height requirements for the storage container, no higher than 10 feet, wouldn't allow double stacking. And as it's written now, it's only allowed in industrial zoning districts. So I do find that interesting part of the discussion that came out. Commissioner Bedard brought this up, what about commercial areas? So I think part of the discussion is going to be talking with staff about maybe applicability and where else appropriate.
And you mentioned industrial areas, but I think that should be examined again. In an industrial area, I can see how stacking might be appropriate. Maybe not in commercial. So, anyway, we can move on.
Okay. Section 9.90, animals. So this applies to question 35. So I know we've already started talking about this before the meeting started, but bees, hens, other small animals, this is looking beyond undeveloped areas. So this is what you would, is this allowed within traditional suburban neighborhoods? The theme is small animals in residential areas, including where are they appropriate, what kinds of animals, are we really getting into defining cats and dogs, or is this more concerned about the raising of chickens and rabbits and so forth? So the key question for the Planning Commission tonight is, should the city allow small animals such as those that I listed outside of areas that are zoned RE? So in your traditional residential neighborhoods, where should they be allowed and under what standards or limitations? Should there be caps applied, minimums, maximums, and allowing different types of animals outside of domesticated, typical household pets? Does this lend itself to compatibility concerns within existing areas? So, Chair, I know that's a mouthful. I know there's some opinions, so I'll hand it right back.
There's a lot going on there. And so first, let me start by saying I recently started a discussion, although he doesn't know it yet, with the city manager. So I emailed him. It seems to me that we have a lot of things going on in terms of animals. You know, we have the Riverside County animal regulations. We have our own regulations. The City Council took an action at the steering committee meeting to look into banning unlicensed breeders, backyard breeders of dogs. There's all these other considerations. So I noted in the presentation that we have this sort of catch-22 where there are references from zoning into animals and animals back to zoning. And I think we need to break that circle. But it seems to me that the way to do that is to actually remove this to a separate section. That this all should be in a separate title. We've got all those considerations. We've got animal welfare, we've got animal licensing, we've got business licenses for animal enterprises. You know, if you want to skin rabbits and sell the pelts or whatever it is you want to do in your backyard, we're encouraging small businesses from home. We have, you know, country kitchens. We have all those things going on as well. So I'm not sure we should be anywhere near anything to do with animals. And what we should probably do instead is refer out to the appropriate title saying for this zone, the requirements are specified in title blah, and that's what you can do in this zone. And that keeps this very flexible, and it avoids this loop of deciding whether bees should be allowed in R1 but not R2, and so on. And let all that animal stuff happen in a different title. That would be my input.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up, and I'm going to jump in here because what I've found, and you're absolutely correct, so we've got circular references throughout the code when it comes to animals. We refer back to Riverside County, maybe not the greatest practice, but in my conversations with the now city manager, my recommendation was that we remove the regulation of animals as animals out of land use. They're not a land use, but the structures and the uses that occupy or where animals occupy, whether that be a kennel or a doghouse or a chicken coop or, you know, whatever that is, that does belong in land use. So we regulate the structure and we regulate uses such as dog kennels or dog daycares, things of that nature, but we leave the animals to the animal folks. That would require, and in those conversations with city manager, it would require that the municipal code probably be updated because it does refer back, we refer there, and and for all intents and purposes, the way that it's written, it only allows certain animals in the RE zone. Well, the RE zone exists in a place where it's not developed, so it's kind of obtuse.
Yeah, I'm sure there are people doing backyard bunny breeding, you know, it's not just dogs or cats or whatever. And
Chinchillas.
we don't need to get into all the details of which animals can do what, but, and welfare can be described in a separate title. So that's, again, so I would say, yeah, your position is the same as mine.
I think that's a neat solution. Yeah, I agree with that.
Agree.
Yes.
I certainly understand why you would want to have animals regulated in another section. And I have some experience with this in another city. I don't know that animals are the biggest issue in Cathedral City as they are in other places. And I've done some research. I've talked to, other cities like that have different kinds of animal regulations because they have estate lots like Beverly Hills, or a city like Hawaiian Gardens that's all apartments, but they still have to have rules that prevent people from having exotic animals in a small space. But I think that if you regulated it to just land use, it's possible to do that, but you need to still have like requirements that, but you have to be careful because, like, for instance, if you have chickens regulated in a different section of the code, and then you say that a chicken coop needs to be 10 feet from a property line or an adjacent residence, then are you saying that you're allowed to have a chicken coop in that zone when you really can't? So you have to be really careful because these two sections are like this. They go together. Also with horses, generally you're going to need a larger property depending on the number of horses that you have. And again, you want the stable building to be a certain distance from the property line. So I think, the two sections go hand in hand, but I think where it specifically deals with the structure or the land use itself, that belongs in the zoning. And for instance, in our definition section, I'm sure that we'll have kennels and catteries, and usually the limit there is 5, except for like newborn puppies up to 12 weeks or something like that. So I think it's hard to separate them, but you could do it, but you still need to have some regulations in our section.
I think the way that you do that separation is you don't say, it's for cats, dogs, bunnies, or whatever, but say that, the land use permits animals, animal structures for animals, whatever, as specified in the animal welfare section. So the animal welfare section will say a cat requires 3 square feet of cage or whatever, So you do it that way. If we get into the details, then if we try and put in stables specifically and catteries and kennels, we've also then got to put in hutches, other types of cage, and so on, because you'd have to have essentially, and beehives, you'd have to have beehives too, because you'd then have to classify every type of animal anybody might want to keep.
If you're going to refer back to I like the way you explained it, so I think you should write that down. In that you can regulate the structure, but then refer back to the other section of the code when it comes to the animal itself. I do like that.
Okay.
I really like that as well, and I do feel sort of like championing the idea of urban animal husbandry and garden agriculture. There's an interesting thing about bees, since it's been like a floating conversation.
I should never have mentioned
is that bees are often choose where they live. If you're having breeding rabbits or breeding other animals, you're doing that type of thing. That's you bringing them in. Like next door to my house, there were wild bees, 3 different hives for 4 years. Never had a problem. They would literally land on my hand, and I'd walk around with them, and they were completely the most docile bees. It was super cool actually to have them. What I'm trying to say is that bees, if they decide to swarm and go into a tree or find a place to live, they don't care about your zoning and they do just fine. Whereas, and it's a different type of animal, like a human then is bringing in quails or bringing in chickens or doing that. So want just to have it on record, I'm really wanting to support different types of animal husbandry in urban areas, and I know other cities have done it, with strict caps on it, like only allowing a certain, like 3 quails, 2 chickens, that type of thing, so that they can be properly managed, and there are easy ways to do that. It just requires regulation and education. So,
and 10 bees, I think we should limit it to 10 bees. So,
Yeah.
No, anyway, yeah, I think we're done with animals. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. So let's switch from animals to lighting. This makes sense.
Okay.
So section 9.95, this is focusing on lighting, specifically looking at outdoor lighting. Now, part of the discussions we had was protection of nighttime sky, not necessarily a dark skies ordinance. If you've ever had a chance to look at one, there are lots of stipulations, highly regulated, and they're very hard to achieve, especially in more urban areas. So how do we get that type of flavor without having the specifics that are required in a dark sky ordinance? And that's what we've attempted to work out with city staff, was to provide some of those more restrictive standards. And also update your standards. Some of the lighting techniques were antiquated in your current code, and so bringing that just up to best practice. So questions 36 and 37, they focus on outdoor lighting, restrictions for event spaces, restaurants, hospitality, decorative lighting, when is it appropriate? There's a photo here on the screen, but you can just go right outside the doors to see decorative lighting on City Hall. So perfect,
And the bell
perfect
tower.
example, right outside.
You notice that?
Yeah.
So how do we regulate outdoor lighting standards? Are they allowed in commercial areas? Are we allowing them in residential areas, the colored lighting? And what are the types of restrictions on hue and chroma and lumens, shielding, light trespass, and the compatibility? So this section, there's a lot of new parts to it. We're here for any additional questions you may have.
Mr. Chair, I read through this and it's very complicated, but I was able to follow most of it. I think you did a really good job of addressing the different kinds of lighting and maintaining that, it's minimized and focused downward rather than upward. But my main question is, and I'm surprised I'm asking this, but are the auto dealers exempt from it? Because most ordinances exempt the auto dealers from the lighting because they need their lighting, and the fact is that, did I miss it?
It is section 95040A6.
A6, yeah.
Vehicle sales. There are some exceptions and conditions.
Well, I was just, since they're our biggest sales tax generator, it seems like you addressed that. I was thinking of them, and I'll be quiet. You addressed it. I somehow I missed it.
I can't imagine how you missed something in 200 pages of notes. As usual, I go back to exceptions. I was looking at the whole of 995040, and I felt like in some ways it was too broad. I think under A4 in that section, for example, I would say that lighting should only be permitted when in use. So, for example, construction lighting only needs to be on when people are constructing. And I think that you've done a good job of prioritizing, ensuring that we minimize the lighting pollution in the city, helping to promote dark skies, which I think a lot of people here want. And I know people in the Cove voted for by not having street lighting. So I would just look at these standards and see where we can strengthen them somewhat. Construction lighting. Are we planning to bring older facilities in line with the code A6, for example? Or are we going to exempt all the automotive salespeople that already have their lighting in place? Or are we going to ask them to bring it into line with the code over some period, or how are we going to deal with that? The 995-050 A looks at LED lighting, which is a nice technology right now. I shouldn't have done it, but I did. I looked up what new lighting technologies are in the pipeline, and there's about 7 new ones, OLEDs onwards. So I think we need to generalize that and say something about high efficiency, or say that it should be generally similar to LED or whatever, rather than just tying us to one technology. So I would find a set of words to do that. I wondered about the curfew, whether it would apply to the auto sales, because typically they keep their lights on. They have a lot of inventory, a lot of money, obviously, on their forecourt. So are we going to apply that curfew to them? And the other thing, I hear from people from time to time complaints about neighbors who have security lighting in their backyard. And are we going to apply some standards to that as well? To say, your lights have to be motion sensor and they have to go off after 10 seconds. Because I know some people have security lights in their backyards that are on all night. And that's disturbing both to humans and to animals. So those were my general comments. Other people?
I guess the only one comment I have, and I think someone in the steering commission made a comment about it in the notes there, and it's kind of appropriate that the upper right picture there is this bright green. And I think one of the steering committee members mentioned there's a particular business on 111 where it's like that, and it really, really, really is quite vivid and sticks out. And I don't know, is there a point when commercial branding clashes with the sort of standards we want to put in place? Like, their brand is horrific neon green. And I don't know if there's anything we can do in our standards to tone that down a bit, because in this particular example, and there's other examples like that, it's really, it really does stand out. And I don't know what ability we have, if that's a commercial trademark or something like that, what we can do about that.
Well, I think one of those examples is down lighting and the other is up lighting, and that probably makes a big difference.
Yeah.
So I do want to just point out that as far as the trend in the design market or stuff like that, we're heading for a conflict, because the design trend in housing is to, people are leaving Christmas lights, what they may call in the past Christmas lights, up all year. And just in my neighborhood, there are now 4 houses that have permanent lights up, and they're beautiful, and they're LED, and they change colors, and they put green for, March, and they do, or for, anyway, they have different colors for different Easter or 4th of July, or, and they are being installed. There's somebody who's actually really making a killing right now as a small business by approaching homeowners and saying, would you like, it's better than security lighting, it actually provides you more coverage, you can have more control with it, the lighting is general instead of just these spots, and I particularly like the look because I like Christmas lights. But I think we are in a clash, because those are, I think they would be classified as right now at least, Christmas lights. I mean, they're at the roof line, they're following where you would put a string of lights around the house, and it's now an all-year trend with home design. So I'm not sure, I think we're probably gonna go more in that area than having big floods and big security lights and stuff like that, because they're not nearly as attractive. And now you have these lights you can put out on the perimeter of your house, and they provide actually more lighting than that spot that blinds you. So I'm just really pointing it out, as I think that's something we need to really, not in 30 years, but pretty quickly start understanding, well, how is this going to affect our code?
If I can just pick up on that.
Forever lights?
If I could just pick up on that, actually, there is another trend, which I will call seasonal lighting, since I don't wish to offend anyone. But that is to have massive displays on some houses where there's a huge display of lighting, it's computer controlled, it's synchronized to music, it becomes a production show. And I think we have to make sure that if people are going to do that, it is limited and licensed. I think we need to have some permits around that kind of show, because that is an inconvenience to neighbors, both because it turns that house into another part of Candy Cane Lane.
I was going to
with
say,
people
don't move to
driving-
Candy Cane Lane.
Yeah, well, I think we know they're an exception. But people driving past to see the display, stopping to watch it, neighbors being inconvenienced both by traffic and noise and so on. So I think that's something else that we also have to consider.
But how would you, I completely get what you're saying, but Minerva Street, AKA Candy Cane Lane, is like a tradition.
Yes.
It's probably doesn't meet code, but I would not want to be the one that would stop that.
We just add it into 995040 exceptions.
Well,
I
Minerva,
think also
Minerva Lane.
in light of what you're talking about, do we consider, would the big inflatables that are also lit, do those count as decorative lighting?
no.
There's signs.
They're signs? What do those count as?
Oh, I thought
You're
okay,
talking
I
about like the
misunderstood.
Christmas snowman that goes up in the front yard.
Yes, but also the Valentine's and the St. Patrick's Day and the,
Holiday decorations.
I mean,
falls
it
under
would be
lighting.
holiday decoration, but it wouldn't be necessarily be a seasonal lighting. I mean, seasonal and holiday lighting is exempt
okay.
as part of 99504.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're not doing anything that is going to have unintended consequences by someone classifying something as a light that's not really a light.
No, but I do think Commissioner Bedard does bring up an interesting fact that I will admit my own house has outdoor colored lighting that changes by time of year, and right now it's Mardi Gras. So it is something to consider that we don't want to start prohibiting that, because a lot of houses are installing the under eave lighting that is LED color changing. And I think that can fall into a seasonal holiday lighting that would be exempt. I think what we're more concerned about is the large flood lighting that's lighting up a block, not necessarily.
I mean, I will say that despite us all seeming to like the Christmas lights, I do see frequently online people complaining about neighbors that keep holiday lights up year round. So there are some people who it does bother. I'm just saying that, and I think we do need to find a balance, but there are some people who are against it, even though we all seem fairly supportive.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's lit all the time.
right, yeah.
And I think too, seasonal displays, I hear what Chair is saying. I think that's something that would take a lot more discussion. I think what you're describing is much more than a display, but more of an attraction, which is a completely different use discussion, temporary. I'm not even sure if the city wants to touch that. But that goes beyond just a lighting display
Is there
itself.
a time limit for this lighting? Like you should turn it off by midnight? Is there any time limit on the city hall's lighting? Is it on throughout the night? Throughout the night.
But I think there's some good topics that we can button up and clarify as part of this. And I think that there's some definite clear direction and some concerns about making sure that we're aligning with what most people are doing these days. So,
And I
appreciate
just want to add one thing here to clarify. I think the point of, and I think they did a great job with the images on this slide, was lighting that sort of acts as advertising. So that was kind of the crossover. It wasn't necessarily holiday lighting. But anyway, thank you. Comments were good.
Okay, so we have 2 more slides for Division 3. We're almost there, and then I can hand the baton to Martha to talk about everyone's favorite topic, subdivisions. But let's talk about performance standards real quick. We talked about lighting. Performance standards focus on noise generation, lighting, vibration from construction or other uses, even smell, dust, lots of things. So question 38 in section 9100 is whether the performance standards should vary depending on zoning district or whether they should just be applied equally across the board. That's our biggest question, at least for the Planning Commission. So I'm going to hand it back to the chair to see if you have any questions or comments for our team.
I think my my general reaction was that it's slightly like animals. Noise is not a structure problem, and so that should be handled somewhere else. And I would try and avoid duplication across different titles here, because that just means one of them is always going to be wrong as the other one changes. So I would look through that list and think, is this really related to the structures in land use in the zoning? Others seemed, in any case, to be impossible to manage. Things. One was, I noted, was humidity, steam coming from a building. If you've got a laundry, it's going to have steam coming off, and the steam's going to cross the property line. So those things, I think, seem to belong in some other municipal code section and not this.
Yeah, but I think if you can't allow a use in an area that then is going to be repeatedly, just by its existence, violating the municipal code. Right, so I mean, if there are certain businesses that are going to be substantially louder than others, we know that for the cannabis growers, we have them in certain zones because we know that even at best, there still may be some odor, right? So I think I think we should be considering some of these elements of, do we want to have, I think the vibration was a good one, and dust. I mean, I asked about the auto body shop that we had at our last meeting. Someone brought up the noise. And is it appropriate to have a concentration of auto body shops right up against residential homes, when we know that theoretically they could be in violation every minute of every day of the code? So it seems like we would just be asking for trouble there. Is that kind of the intention of this? 'Cause I personally think, yes, the standards should not be the same across all zones. I think there should be higher standards required for certain areas than others. I don't think they should be the same, for sure.
I think you have to be careful, with the auto repair that's adjacent to residential all along Ramon, when they do the air pressure makes noise, and they have I'm not a car person, but there's all kinds of loud noises that come from the auto repair that probably should be a certain distance away from residential or controlled in some way. Just like, when you have a paint booth, the air quality district requires you to have certain kinds of, it has to be constructed in such a way so that the fumes don't go out and poison the community. So I think, we do need to look into that. And then there's just weird things that can become an issue. So I remember the former director told me that one of the big issues about the gym that was built in the old Albertsons on on Date Palm was an issue in that people were throwing the weights around. And the people that lived in the back, could feel that, and they were right, because like if you were on the Stairmaster when they did that, you could like fall off from the vibration. Now I don't know that that's something that would be regulated, but they certainly were a nuisance, and they somehow stopped those guys from doing that. But it's a very hard thing to regulate and a hard thing to enforce.
So I had a question on, is the process of building, construction, does that follow underneath this?
They have hour limitations for winter and summer.
Right, correct. I know that. So I'm bringing it up because my neighborhood was impacted a lot by this at one point, and we were told it was by right, but wonderfully the problem stopped. So the Rio del Sol, Mario, who's come in and is redeveloping the part that they stopped working on, right? Their back entrance is one of the 3 streets of my neighborhood. And all of a sudden one day at 5 a.m, there was 20 cement trucks lined up outside of the development on the street, running, waiting for the time to go into the construction site. And because it was a public street, we were told, oh, they can do whatever they want, because it's a public street, it's a residential street, there's no parking restrictions, they can line up their trucks as whatever they want to do, they can. So that was a big concern in my neighborhood, because the noise, the vibration, the number of trucks lined up, again, it stopped, so whoever made some phone calls got it to stop. And it was interesting because the developer, Mario, was just like, hey, I can do that. It's not a problem. I know in other higher-end cities, that would not have even happened. But the HOA at the Rio del Sol made it very clear to Mario, the developer, that he couldn't bring his trucks through their part, the already developed part. They couldn't line up in the already developed part because people didn't want them in front of their homes. So then they were in front of our homes, right? Does that follow under this type of thing?
I wouldn't say to the detail or specific level you're getting at.
So construction activity is good. Construction activity is going to be regulated under Title 11, Chapter 11.96 for noise. And so it does have hours that construction activities can occur depending on the time of year. And then, if
Right,
it's a
and this
holiday
was
or
all
not. So-
before that, and they were lining up. It's on a public street. They could park there if they want to.
So we had, some instances where even on-site, construction workers for the development were staging and getting ready. I mean, they weren't starting actual technical, construction, but they were staging and getting vehicles moving around. And we've told developers they can't do that because that's part of their construction activity. So I don't know the situation about this lining up on the streets, and I can follow up on that if you like.
It was taken care of. I'm just using it as an example to see if that type of thing, because these are large developments that are being worked on. They were just parking there.
Yeah.
And when large vehicles park, they idle.
Right.
So they were just parking there by right. Go ahead.
That particular development, actually, we had anticipated that, and that had a construction traffic plan. And it had strict rules with when they lined up, when they can line up, and using that as the entrance for heavier vehicles.
Right.
So you might want to look that up for the Rio del Sol, that second phase in there.
And it was a temporary problem, and that construction is probably going to be going on for the next 10 years. So it's a long-term temporary problem. So, okay. That was it.
Anything further?
Basically, to concur with what the vice chair said in relation to different standards in different zones, and the example she brought up, I concur with that.
Yeah, and I don't disagree, but I would just look to eliminate any duplication that we can. We actually mention in here that that noise is already controlled under Title 11. So, I mean, you know, it doesn't need to be in two places. Anyway, okay, I suggest that we complete 105 signs and then take a 5-minute recess, if that's okay. Yeah, all right.
Okay, to wrap up Division 3, 105. This focuses on signs, so questions 39 through 42. This section, we worked with city staff to update. There's some federal law requirements, there's free speech requirements, messaging requirements. So content neutrality is a big, big component of this. So what we did is we worked with staff to clearly identify the types of signs, the requirements, how do you calculate signage, what are the types of appropriate signs for Cathedral City, what are the triggers for sign expansion, how do we handle master sign programs or areas that have special requirements. It was brought up earlier with lighting, the auto area. Are they exempt from sign standards or do they have their own? So part of the questions that we have for the Planning Commission tonight is just to make sure that what's in front of you improves the clarity of the standards, it meets the expectations. Whether there should be additional rules and regulations for certain temporary signs or whether they should be prohibited. Where are master sign programs or sign master plans appropriate? If and when? And the types of materials and other design requirements that are applied to signs. Does this meet the expectations that the Planning Commission and the city is looking for? So there's a lot to unpack in this section, so I'll hand it over to the chair if you have any questions.
Thank you. I think we generally have agreed in previous discussions, we're not looking to turn this into the Vegas Strip. So we definitely don't want to go to that level. Neither do we want 20-foot tall inflatable chickens on buildings. So I know that was already mentioned.
Inflatable chickens?
Yes, in the doesn't matter. Anyway, in 22 the city banned new billboard construction in the city. So we already know that their direction is to reduce the amount of signage. And I think this goes in the right direction, but I don't think that that really anticipated the number of Gumby signs, feather signs that are appearing along arterials. And I think that that's probably something that we ought to look at controlling as to where they're appropriate and where they should be allowed. And all my comments really relate to distraction for motorists. I think that's one of the biggest issues to address. In terms of master plans, I still think they're appropriate. I think that we had a master plan here that we evaluated for CV Rep a few years ago. And I think that discussion was very valuable in terms of deciding how much space could be used for signs, what size they would be, their placement on the building, and so on. And I think it's turned out very nicely. CV Rep looks good, but I think we still need the ability to have those discussions, and the PC is probably the right place to have that discussion. Let's see. Yes. Consistency of new signs. I think the electronic signs, which are static, are preferable over all the other types of signs. I mean, the old signs that you see along the way where the lettering has to be replaced all the time and it's faded and it's different, doesn't look good. So electronic signs, but the thing I think is not good is, take the casino as an example. They have on the corner there a sort of 18-foot video sign with a lot of flashing movement and distractions on it. And I think that's the kind of thing that we should be looking for the city to limit the use of. So I'm thinking, if you look in some cities, you look in bus shelters, for example, you'll see that they have signs which are poster-like and change every 30 seconds or whatever. And I don't think that's particularly distractor for motorists, so that kind of sign might be fine. But having a lot of moving components, flashing lights, rainbows or whatever, projecting, that kind of stuff is probably not what we're looking to do for the city.
So just to clarify, the video display signage that's part of the casino, you would classify that differently than the digital board on 111 outside the CB rep that has public information, the Cathedral City sign?
So the CV rep sign, it changes a full page probably every 30 seconds or maybe less than that. But and they go, you know, from one of their subscribers or promoters to one of the shows and whatever. And that's not an animated display, whereas a video has got, you know, a conjurer doing tricks or whatever, people dancing on poker machines running this, the reels. So that kind of animation, I think, is too distracting, and it really does bring us more towards the Strip in Vegas than it does to you know, our urban community. So those are my major points. Other comments? Yes.
I agree with you, and one of my recommendations was that if you have an electronic reader board, then you should be required to have a sign program. And then that way we can look at each one of those proposals and make sure it has the standards that we want. I think political signs, I was concerned, our city attorney can elaborate, but I don't think you can regulate them. You said that they can't put them on utility poles. I think they can. I think they can. I think for the political signs, they could do just about anything, and they don't even need people's permission to put it on their property. Am I correct, Madam City Attorney?
We do limit them on public, you know, utility poles, stop signs, things like that. So we do have some time, place, and manner restrictions on them.
Yeah, generally, I would say that the time, place, and manner restrictions are, depending on, you know, how restrictive they are, they're typically okay. Some cities will also regulate how long certain political signs can be
Right,
used.
and I knew about that, but I thought you couldn't tell them you can't put them in the medians. You can't tell them not to put it on stop signs or utility poles. And I thought that for political signs, well, I guess you answered the question. I guess you can. I thought that they had the ultimate flexibility.
There's certainly very strong protections, particularly for political expression and political signs. I'm not familiar with anything that
It's
says
just something we should check out.
that we would have to allow in medians, for example, or on utility poles, but we can certainly
I'm all for it if you can regulate
look into
them
it. Yeah.
doing it, but I
It's a
just
great
don't
question.
think you can.
And I think this is something that can get discussed further at the city administration
Yeah.
level and with legal.
Yeah, we have a pretty strong code, and that might even be an appropriate little seminarette that we do for you, especially coming into the next campaign cycle. Because the code compliance goes out there, and they'll pull signs that have been there too long, and if they're in the wrong place. So
And we do have
definitely, that's a
limitations.
good education.
And we do have limitations on how long the political signs can be out. The biggest stipulation with the political signs is if you're going to start placing it on property, you have to have consent of the property owner to start placing the signs. And there are certain size restrictions in certain areas, but not regulating the content of the sign itself. It's considered an exempt sign, so no sign permit or anything like that is required.
Okay, just look into it at the,
Sure.
you know, with the attorney. I don't think it was clear that balloons on a roof should be prohibited, so you can't put like a big panda on top of on top of a building, like they.
I believe we have that under number 14, prohibited tethered balloons
Okay.
or other inflatable objects.
Like they do in a
20-foot chicken.
Sousa. Sousa has the big panda. On a wall signs on a corner unit. Now, so if you have a corner unit in your building and they both face, the front and the side face right away or the parking area, I think then you should be able to have 2 wall signs, and you should be able to calculate the 1 square foot per linear foot for each side for the total signage you could have on that part of the building. And I don't think that it says you can do that. Then the only other thing I had was for the height of a freeway sign, I think you should use, instead of not having a maximum, well, to determine what the maximum should be, you had a maximum height, which then everybody will just go for that. But if you do a flag test that it's visible from like 1/10 of a mile, then you won't have them as high along the freeway, or even, I don't think you can do the freeway signs in any other part, but, adjacent to the freeway. But I think the flag test should be used to determine what the maximum height is. And what the flag test is they get a crane and they raise it 10 feet. And then when it's visible from 1/10 of a mile, that would determine what the maximum height is. So those are my comments on signs.
And we can discuss that further with city staff on metrics for highway oriented.
Commissioner Fail?
It's just a couple on the last 2 questions, really, and I think it ties in with the walking tours that we did and things that we've heard when we went to the workshop, the DatePam workshop. I think we'd all be in favor of some degree of consistency in signage, especially along these major corridors, because it certainly gives a more cohesive feel to those corridors. So I think in terms of question 1, yes, let's do that. How we implement that, I'll leave to bigger minds than mine. And question 2 as well. It sounds like, with our auto industry, the signage that is there has kind of just grown organically, and we've made exceptions here and there, and maybe that does need to be reviewed, and some kind of more general policy for an area like that should be in place. And you mentioned something about sign district overlay, and I don't know, do we have examples of that in other cities that we could use to implement something like that?
The Hollywood area in Los Angeles, I was going to ask about that, has a sign district, the Hollywood sign district, because there are a lot of historic buildings that have historic signage, and so there are limitations on what you can put in on new construction so that it doesn't compete with that kind of look.
Yeah.
There are lots of examples of communities that have far stricter sign regulations than what's before you. And I think it depends on how much flexibility the city wants to provide. So I think working with the city staff, it was trying to strike that balance between a cohesive environment that's not overburdened by signage, but still has signage that's adequate.
So I just have personal feedback in that I had 2 brick and mortar stores. I hated street signs, and I thought, oh, they clutter things, they make a mess, they get in the way. And I tell you, when I put out my sandwich boards, my business jumped 20, 30%. So the importance of that type of sign, that like skinny flag that you see in front of businesses, or the sandwich board on the corner. Literally, mine was, my store was in the middle of the block, and I'd put my sign out on the corner, and it increased all of my people that were driving by, and like, oh, I didn't even know your store existed. And then I saw the sign when I was at the stop sign, or I was at the red light. Those signs made my business a success. Without my little skinny flag and without my sandwich board, nobody knew I was there. They would just drive right by. So although I don't particularly like them as a resident, as a business owner, they made my store successful.
And I think what's important within the draft that's in front of you, we do address portable signs. So that's your A-frame or H-frame signs. The flags, the moving twirly-whirly banners, those fall under prohibited. But if it is something that the commission wants to open up and have further discussion on or ask staff to re-examine, we can definitely do so.
I think I don't want to have a discussion about it, but just as feedback for that, I know they're prohibited, and again, I think a lot of businesses rely on that.
Understood.
I had,
Oh, go ahead.
two things. One, I think I brought this up during steering committee, and I can't remember what the response was. So, off-site advertising. In Los Angeles, it was technically banned, and you could report it as a code violation, and someone would come out, and they would look, and then they would find the person, and then they would put it back up. So it's not like it was effective. But when you allow businesses to earn revenue from putting up signs from other businesses, so what I mean is you are a restaurant, you put up a sign advertising a business that's across town, or advertising the Sony PlayStation, which you don't sell there, right? So you're advertising something that cannot be purchased, or a service or a good that can't be purchased at that establishment. You then encourage lots of extra signage. And that can become very visually cluttering and also start to cheapen the look of an area just because everything is an ad. So I'm just wondering, I don't remember seeing anything about that in the proposed code. Is that something that has been discussed? I know it's not an issue now, but a lot of times it's most common with like convenience stores, a lot of times. But I'm thinking just for the future, not necessarily for our current situation.
Off-site signs, I mean, is outwardly prohibited.
It is outwardly prohibited?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's number 6.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So
I just want-
getting into, I think some of the other signs that you've brought up go beyond off-site because it's like advertising a product that the store sells. I think of 7-Eleven that has signs up that are products that they have in the
Yeah,
windows.
if they have them inside, that's fine. I'm saying it's more for people putting up signs to advertise stuff that isn't available at that location.
Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that would fall under number 6, would be
It would,
off-site.
okay, great.
Yeah.
And then do flagpoles count as signage?
Flag poles?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because I know there have been in other parts of the country some battles over giant flagpoles, and I know he mentioned the flagpole scale, and so I'm just wondering, do flagpoles at any point count as signage for a business if a business has a giant flagpole?
So if there was 3 flagpoles at Wendy's and they have a US flag and a California flag and a Wendy's flag, would the Wendy's flag count as signage?
Yeah.
We do cover flags, and I'll have to go back and look in here. Flags are considered exempt.
They are, even if they're a business flag, not a,
Doesn't get into, we may need to refine it a bit more.
I think staff has noted that we need the distinction between governmental flags.
Okay.
I don't know how we make that, because I know there's a First Amendment thing there as well, so.
Or as Martha said, non-commercial.
Oh, yes, thank you.
perfect, thank
Let
you.
me just go back on
Sure.
on the off-site. So it's an interesting comment because when we approved the CV Rep signage, their master plan, it turned out that they used the electronic sign outside to theoretically thank donors. But what they really have are ads for certain restaurants and certain businesses. And that was ruled as permitted under our current code. So is that not permitted now in this proposal?
Is it possible it was covered under the sign program? Because you said CV Rep had a sign program.
They do have a sign program.
No, it wasn't. So, but I raised it at the time, and I was told that we can't determine what they put on that sign once it's out there. So those off-site essentially off-site ads for restaurants and businesses were included. And I guess that goes back to the other point, which is about the not being allowed to read the content, which is 105.030, the content neutrality. So I'm wondering how that all works in here. You know, if you're not allowed to consider what's on the sign and somebody puts an off-site sign up, how can you prohibit it? Equally, if somebody uses an electronic sign for hate speech, we're not allowed to look at it and prevent that. How does this actual neutrality work?
Do you have,
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. So typically there is a distinction between the regulation of commercial speech versus non-commercial speech. Commercial speech, while still subject to the First Amendment, is subject to less protection typically. So that can be more regulated in general than non-commercial speech. Hate speech is a little bit trickier. Again, it's kind of an expression. So any time, place, and manner restrictions that you can place on that, as well as, you know, certain profanity or other, like, you know, speech that would rise to the level of a public nuisance may be regulated as well.
Yeah, I'm still not understanding. I mean, maybe it's because it's a more legal point. I mean, if somebody wants to put up a sign that says, you know, immigrants go home or gays should be shot on a sign that we've approved, if we are neutral on the content, how do we stop that?
Well, yeah, that is a tricky situation. I mean, you would again want to see if you can regulate where the signs are located or the size, or I mean, when you're talking about the content of the sign, unless it's a distinction between commercial speech and non-commercial, that's a little bit harder. But that's certainly something that our office could look into in more detail and get back to you.
I mean, if there is a way to do that through what we're doing here and prohibit that kind of racial or other prejudiced speech, then I
Yeah.
would like to do it. But if it's not possible, it's not possible.
So let us look into that some more, because there are First Amendment protections, but there are also, you know, some regulations with regard to obscenity or profanity and things of that nature. So let us look at that more closely and circle back and get that information to the commission. The other thing too is the question about the content neutrality. How do you, if it's content neutral, we can't look at the, you know, then how are we determining it's an off-site sign or not an off-site sign? So, you know, we do have definitions in our sign code, but we'll also get some more clarity for you on that as well.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, going back to Vice Chair Mead's comment on the flags, I certainly don't want to open Pandora's box. However, I think there's a difference between, when it comes to flags, there's a business like, you know, Wendy's or McDonald's having a flag that you could regulate. But then if it's a charitable flag, that's different, and that I don't think should be prohibited. And there was a case in Boston that you can look up where the Supreme Court said the city couldn't prevent a charity from flying a flag at City Hall. It was like a fourth flagpole that was open, and they said only certain people could use it. But what I'm saying is if it's a nonprofit, that shouldn't be regulated. And there was a situation in the Valley not too long ago where a city, I don't want to say who, tried to prohibit a pride flag, and you know that hit a nerve. And after I said what I did about the commercial flags, I thought we need to make sure that nonprofits or charitable causes don't fall into that prohibition. Again, that might be a tricky issue, but we need to look into that. I certainly don't want us to have a kind of hearing that other city had.
Thank you.
Yes, and that is not what I meant at all.
It's not what I meant
you were
either.
talking- I meant more as an advertising. I just
Yeah,
wasn't
I did
sure.
too.
An advertisement for the business.
I did too, but after I agreed
No,
with
that's a good
you,
call.
I thought, oh my God, are we going to prohibit charitable flags? And it's not going to be easy for the attorney's office to do that, but I have confidence that you can clearly give us the guidance we need to have it so that that freedom to put up a charitable cause is there.
Okay.
I know you can do it.
I think that's something that we can definitely work with city staff and the city attorney and look into. I think it goes beyond at least the discussion tonight.
All right. Thank you. Anything else on signage? In which case, we move to a 5-minute recess. Thank you. with the Planning Commission meeting, giving it back to the consultants for the next part of their presentation.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to take it over for planned unit developments and subdivision ordinance. And it's going to be a little bit of a shift in what you've been going over. These next two sections are a little more technical, more procedural in nature, to a large extent dictated by state law. So while they're very important and significant parts of your code, and we want to go over them with you and get comments on them, there's less kind of policy questions than Division 3 had or some of the previous divisions that you had. So just kind of a little bit different of a flavor. So starting with planned unit developments, or PUDs. So planned unit developments are a process. They provide a process to allow more flexibility for the design of development. Development projects, more creativity, more flexibility than what would be possible through the strict application of the base zoning district standards. And that's in exchange for superior development or substantial community benefit. So it's a discretionary process, and it's really somebody proposing something, hey, I want to do this thing. It doesn't totally meet the base standards, but it's superior than what could be achieved under those standards, or I'm going to offer the city something in addition, some substantial community benefit that will make that kind of exchange beneficial. So those can be very powerful tools when used correctly. They can also lead, if there's too much use of them, and Brent and I have both worked in cities that sometimes the majority of the city is covered with individual planned unit developments, that can lead to very complex framework where essentially, you know, there's no consistency in standards. Almost everybody seems to have like their own rules and regulations that apply. So that's kind of the danger in them, the overuse or misuse of them. Typically, that often happens when there is a very rigid code. So there's no opportunities for flexibility otherwise in the code, so people use the PUD process to get that flexibility. So looking forward and kind of thinking how PUDs best fit in with Cathedral City, the approach is to really discourage the misuse or overuse of PUDs and discourage their use to modify development standards really on a lot-by-lot basis, where that should be really baked into your provisions for flexibility. So, and that's what you've been talking about through your review of the draft standards, building into the code those allowances for flexibility, building that into the development standards. Also with writing the actual PUD provisions, we're intending to highlight the intent of offering that flexibility in exchange for gaining superior development project or substantial community benefit. And that's something that goes through a discretionary and negotiated process between, you know, what that benefit would really kind of vary, and it would be up to the decision makers to make that determination. It goes through a public process. The community gets that opportunity to provide input as well. So there's just a couple discussion questions on planned unit development. The first one is there's any circumstances under which you can imagine that a PUD should be required rather than being optional. So you're kind of a place where you think it'd be appropriate to kind of force this area into that negotiated or negotiation state. And then two, the question is, are there any PUDs that you're familiar with that you would consider kind of a misuse of that PUD tool? We understand if you're not aware of any, because it's not like PUDs are often just advertised as PUDs, right. But if anything came to mind, we would be curious and interested in hearing that.
Okay.
So,
pass
that.
Thank you. Thank you for the overview of the PUD. My understanding is that often they are also used for things like basically getting some advantage from the city, like an increase in density or so on. And obviously we don't necessarily We don't want to be in a position where small PUDs are introduced simply to provide those kinds of benefits. I mean, I think we can do that in other ways. My thought was that perhaps it's appropriate in our city to have a baseline size for a PUD. So we say 5 or 10 acres is the minimum for that. I'm not so sure about whether there should be an upper size where we require it, but if you went to 20 acres or something, you might want to say, well, we need a PUD because we need the flexibility to ensure that such a large development includes a number of things that might otherwise not happen in zoning, like corner shops or other facilities like clubhouses or whatever it is, something that we might not get in other ways. So those would be my thoughts about that first question. I don't think I know of any that have been misused, but along with a lot of other developments, we are seeing that they just aren't getting developed. That's a different issue. How do we encourage people once they're entitled to actually develop these projects? But that applies to a lot of. So that's my basic view. Yes.
I guess I have a little bit of a definitional question to begin with, which is, a little while ago, we had a presentation on what we call specific plan areas, in which staff did a presentation where we talked about some that are no longer appropriate and they're obsolete, and should we have minimum sizes, and they're going to do some work and refine those for us. So I guess my first definitional question is really, what's the difference between an SPA and a PUD when you do one versus the other?
Well, now I'll let maybe staff weigh in on the SPA portion of it, but specific plans have some, in order to be a specific plan, there are some things you have to include in it per the California Government Code. So it has to have financing plan, infrastructure plan, which you're not required to have for a PUD. So sometimes they can, I would say, it's not black and white when you have to or would use one versus the other. There's some objectives that you could accomplish through either process, kind of that coordinated, phased development.
So we got a presentation on here are our SPAs and how big they are and what's going on in them. I do not have a good picture of what our PUDs are and what sizes they are. And I don't know if there's any that you can give as examples to us.
And one distinction I'll just add in here is that Martha classified those correctly. I think she did a great job. But the thing I might distinguish is that PUDs are generally single ownership and it's for a specific project. Subdivision, a mixed use, mixed income kind of development, something along those lines that's meant to develop out at one time.
It's like Rio del Sol, is that?
Something like that,
okay.
or a Desert Bloom, which was another housing project that incorporates some smaller setbacks to kind of accumulate that extra space into open space for the community. So that would be an appropriate use of a PUD. A specific plan is generally oftentimes used to help facilitate things that the city is looking for or developer is looking for that wouldn't otherwise occur over multiple properties or for multiple property owners.
Okay, that makes sense.
Generally, not always. Good characterization that there isn't a black and white line. This is when you pick this one versus when you pick that one. You can use them for different things, but there are better applications.
I would also add that typically you want a specific plan where you have large areas. You're talking 500 acres, 1,000 acres, and where there's, you're still planning out what the infrastructure needs to be to support that build out of those 500, 600 acres. Streets, sewer, water, what's needed to support that ultimate development. And you'll see specific plans typically for that. We do have a lot of smaller specific plans. That's why we're going through them, determining what's needed, what's not needed. So that's also a distinction of when we might want to have a specific plan that we look at in the future and when we want to look at something like a PUD.
Isn't Cimarron Cove a PUD? I believe it is.
I'm sorry, which one's Cimarron Cove?
Cimarron Cove is on the corner of Landau and Ramon.
And McCallum, yeah, so it's that area.
Yeah.
And they put in some extra amenities, and they got some advantages for doing that. I can't remember exactly what they were, but that's a PUD, even though it's a gated community.
In the steering committee report that we got, one or more brought up the idea of if you do grant a PUD that we should get some public good in return. And that certainly sounds like a good idea. And I don't know, do we have any examples in the city where we've had that sort of negotiation in recent years in order to establish a PUD? Have we received something? And is that a normal practice that you see from your work in dealing with PUDs, that cities tend to negotiate to get something in return?
So historically in the city, the way we've used PUDs is different than what we're contemplating moving forward under this code update, right? So our PUD ordinance right now allows flexibility with lot sizes, lot coverage, lot dimensions. And the trade-off is that you provide these common amenities. But what we're looking at is contemplating something a little bit more. And we don't really have a lot of this discussion about, well, you're going to have some flexibility, but what's the community benefit? We don't have that discussion under our current PUD regulations. And so I think what we're looking at here is kind of pivoting a little bit from that if you want that flexibility, provide a community benefit.
Sounds good.
Anything else on PUD? I'm assuming this is just the start of this section, so we're going to see a lot more about this.
We're going to move into subdivisions next. So planned unit developments was actually one section in Division 7, which came before you previously, but there was a placeholder for PUDs. So
okay.
PUDs is actually...
So we're filling in those gaps now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, should have
That's right.
included that.
That's my what?
In the next part of your presentation, you'll cover time extensions?
Yes, map time
Subdivision,
extensions,
okay.
yes.
I'll wait till then.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right, then we'll move on to subdivisions. So Division 5, which is the subdivision ordinance, provides procedures for various types of land divisions consistent with the state Subdivision Map Act. So the local jurisdictions have their own subdivision ordinance, but it's the process and contents, and a lot of it is really dictated by the state in the Subdivision Map Act. And then there's some areas where the individual jurisdiction has some authority or jurisdiction for different things, and we'll kind of point some of those out for discussion. But basically, the subdivision ordinance covers everything from the general provisions, which is, the applicability, the authority, establishes that it is to be consistent with the state Subdivision Map Act. Then there's the procedures for preparing and the review and approval process for tentative parcel maps, tentative maps, as well as vesting tentative maps, and those are where the tentative map will vest into the rules and regulations that apply at the time that the map was applied for. So that's kind of the proposal and the approval process, and then there's a section on parcel and final maps, which is the recording of the maps, the processes for that. Certificates of compliance, which are really establishing a public record of a lot. Reversions to acreage, that's kind of the dissolution of a subdivision and reverting it back to acreage. Provisions for mergers of parcels, which is really merging individual parcels together. as well as lot line adjustments where there's no increase or decrease in parcels, they're just moving boundary lines. Provisions for airspace subdivisions, condominium conversions, urban lot splits, which are the result of some recent state housing legislation. There's subdivision design standards in there for all the design standards that subdivisions are required to meet, as well as provisions for dedications and reservations, improvements that are required, the process for those and securing them, and then violations and enforcement. So it covers kind of the whole gamut of land division. So Cathedral City, when the city incorporated, the city essentially adopted Riverside County's subdivision ordinance. Over time, some Riverside County updates and some Cathedral City specific updates have been adopted into that original subdivision ordinance. And the current Cathedral City subdivision ordinance is actually just a patchwork of ordinances with many outdated provisions and outdated references. And again, it used this Riverside County subdivision ordinance as its foundation, as its base, and Riverside County itself has since updated their, comprehensively updated their subdivision ordinance. So it's kind of the pieces are falling apart here for Cathedral City. So with this development code update, the approach for subdivisions was to create a subdivision ordinance which is legally consistent with the MAP Act. It is of and for the city. It aligns with city procedures, aligns them with state law, reflects the current practice, and overall really improves that procedural consistency, accuracy, clear language, and having just a really complete and concise set versus this kind of patchwork that you've been working with. So again, there's a lot of procedural things set out through the MAP Act, but there are a couple of discussion questions. One of them has to do with the time extensions for tentative map approval periods. So longer tentative map approval periods save administration, they save staff time in extending subdivision agreements, processing the time extensions, so on. So under the current provisions, tentative map approval is 2 years, and then that approval is eligible for 3 one-year time extensions. So the MAP Act does allow the city to establish other time frames, and so looking at, in the updated code, having some longer time periods. So having a tentative map approval period for 3 years, that initial thing, and then the approval eligible for 3 one-year time extensions. Alternatively, it could be different. It doesn't have to be 3 one-year extensions. It could be different kind of options within that. So that's, I guess the question is, are those approval periods appropriate, or should other extension periods be allowed? And kind of, it's not uncommon for an applicant to need additional time to fulfill all the requirements that are needed in order to be able to, record that map. So that's the first discussion question.
Okay, thank you. I think this has come up a lot in our discussions over the last few years, and that's because it seems odd that we have this system where essentially we get back to us a request to approve an extension when we're not really going to discuss it, we're just going to give it. So I'm not sure if that's grounded in law. Is it in the Act that we can't have any conditions on that extension approval?
I would have to look in the short answer is I'm going to say that you can't, in approving an extension, you can't add conditions to it. It's not reopening the project. The question before you is whether that could be extended, and there's certain findings that you would be made in order to make that extension. So
can we instead create a system? So we might say the initial approval is for 3 years, with 1 year extension if you want another extension, you would have to show in that application that you have funding and that you've made progress and that you're doing something. So what I'm looking for is how do we avoid land simply being left for 6 years with no development going on because the developer has entitled it and then sells it on somebody else who doesn't want to do the development, who then sells it on somebody else, and it just doesn't go anywhere. So can we use the extensions, have a structure that says you get this, but then you have to add this information for us to approve the next extension? Is that legal?
Technically, well, I live by the MAP Act. I have a copy in my office we look at all the time. So the reason those extensions exist and that you really don't have a lot of power over it is to make them not discretionary, because it protects the landowner from the investment that he's already put into the property from being just discarded by what you're just saying, well, you haven't done anything with the property, when in fact, he's already expended a significant amount of property to improve the property. And it's his right, or her right, whatever. It's the property owner's right to develop it, not develop it. You'd want them to develop it, but it's their right to do whatever they want to do with the property. So it protects the property owner's rights from that. And when developers go into different agencies, they look at how long they're going to be able to have their map so that they can, if they're a progressive business person that wants to make money, has partners, they're going to want time to be able to accumulate the funding or work through the times. Like right now. Right now, you got everyone entitling properties, but they're not going to build because it's not the right time. The interest rates aren't right. But when the interest rates are right, they're ready to go and booming. And I talked about this the last time we had this discussion. So it is built to protect the property owner from their investment within a reasonable amount of time being curtailed.
Except that when they run out of these extensions, they have to go back to square one and start again.
Correct.
So, you know, in that case,
But they will also look at agencies and go, why am I going to go in that city or this county or whatever? The county has traditionally had longer extension periods because their processes tend to be a little longer, but it's been inviting for developers to go through the process.
so let me throw it back to the consultant. So you obviously work for a lot of cities. Have you seen cities that have been able to control this process in a way that encourages faster development?
I have not worked with a city that has asked me to be involved in that, so I don't know. It hasn't been brought up.
So in your experience then, in other cities in California, it works the same way, that every extension is simply approved and there is no stick to the carrot here. That we have no way of controlling that.
Right, and actually, generally, time extensions are moving towards, or approval periods are moving towards longer approval periods, and extensions are moving to more and more of a straight ministerial by right process. And part of that is because of the current state of financing and just how development, what it takes to go from initial approval all the way to groundbreaking. That's the general trend that we've seen.
And if I could just add, Mr. Chairman, so the MAP Act is very clear about time extensions and authority to not grant a time extension or to modify the time extension. And we'll go back and we'll look at that. But my recollection is that to not approve a time extension under the MAP Act, there needs to be health and safety findings that need to be made. So there's a basis or purpose for not granting that extension. So I think that the intent is to make them ministerial.
Essentially by right.
Yes.
In which case, why don't we just say you've got 6 years? Why is there this year after year
Oh,
extension?
A better way is to say that you don't have discretionary,
Authority.
you can't discretionarily disapprove the project or disapprove the time extension. If you had findings, you can do so, but they have to be findings that are related to how is this impacting, as Sandra said, one of them.
There's something the developer has to do something to apply for the time extension, right? They have to fill out some sort of application. They have to go through a process. They have, even if
Yes.
it's just ministerial, there's effort required on their part. So I think the reason we have the
Fair enough.
extensions is that saying you have 6 years, they don't have to do anything. At least there's a little bit of a inconvenience on.
But there's no consequence for what they write
Well,
after that year.
No.
They're still going to get it.
Well, there's a couple things. One is our interim director is correct that you can deny it on a health. It's not easy to deny a time extension. It can be on a health and safety issue. It can be if the environmental circumstance has changed, and there's very specific findings, but they're very hard to make for you to deny it, and it's very rare that it happens. Also, one of the things that I discussed with our now city manager before he was the city manager was, I tended to agree with what you're saying that, it should just be the 3 years and that's it. And he and I discussed a little bit about, other things that we need to take into consideration in this ordinance. And one of them is that I don't think anybody sits on property because they want to. They sit on it because there's a lot of things that need to be done before they can move forward, and the financing is so difficult. So there is another side to the coin that they're not just, taking their time on purpose just to, for an advantage. And then the other thing that I brought up during steering committee, but I didn't write down the section for tonight, is that the Subdivision Map Act actually allows a total of 9 years. So, and I think Commissioner McPhail had the numbers right. So you could get an initial 3 years, and then you could get in any kind of order another 6. And at the steering committee, I don't think that we had any concurrence on how that should be split up. In my opinion, which I'm not sure what conclusion we came to at steering committee. In my opinion, it should be like up to 2 3-year extensions, and that gives they have to go to the effort to do that. Now there were other people. I don't want to speak for my fellow commissioner, but there were other people that thought it should be like 3, 2, and 1, and there are other people that thought it should be a shorter period. But we can go up to 6 years. I think that's a long time, but I also think that there's a lot of stuff they have to go through. And I think we need to consider that to be the streamlined organization that the city council wants us to be. But I agree with you, Vice Chair, that shouldn't just give them the whole thing all at once. There should be some effort they have to make. And I think the issue is, what should that time period be?
So I actually had in my notes that your question asks, it says the proposed tentative map approval period is 3 years and the approval is eligible for 3 one-year extensions. But in section 9.150.100, which is expiration of approved tentative parcel maps, it actually says the map expires not more than 2 separate times each for up to 3 years each. So it doesn't actually match what you have on the question.
Yeah, that's the section I was talking about.
Right, but I'm saying, she's saying there are 3 one-year extensions, that's 3 total years. The actual language in the code you provided us says 2 separate times up to 3 years each, which is 6 years. So it's twice as long as what's actually, so my question was, which one is correct?
So the slide is incorrect. So that, I think it was a kind of a
Copied,
copy and
pasted.
paste.
Yeah, okay.
That didn't get corrected. So yeah, the proposed as written, and again, as you're talking about, there's flexibility on this, but as drafted, it is 2 separate time extensions each for up to 3 years each.
If,
I mean, I will just say real quickly, because during steering committee, John and I went back and forth quite a lot about this very particular subject matter, because I feel the same way you do. I know that there's what was a very useful shopping development near where I used to live that provided food and services to a lot of the workers of the Hollywood area that was completely demolished before I moved here, and it is still vacant. And since then, the architect has died, the development company has been trying, I think they already sold it once, and now they're trying to sell it again. And frankly, it's just a vacant lot now. And I think it's not so much, even though it bothers me, that it seems to me like they're at this point just trying to make money on it because it's been entitled, but it bothers me that they were allowed to demolish a whole shopping plaza full of businesses that the community relied on, and it's still just a vacant lot. So not only did they not build anything, but they took something away. So, I mean, I think I don't know, I'm very concerned about this, there not being any incentive or us giving them too much time to move forward. I understand, the other side, that people have to get financing and things like that, and there are a lot of stuff they have to do, but 9 years is a long time. It's a decade where nothing might be done at all.
let me clarify
Then we
that.
got to start over.
Let me
Look at
clarify
it.
that point, because you mentioned a 9-year period, and we have a
Total 9-year with the 6
Total.
years. of
total 9-year. And this is proposing 3 years with 3 1-year extensions.
No, she
That's
said that. She
incorrect.
said that's wrong.
It's
Oh, I'm
2
sorry.
3-year extensions.
Okay.
So it's 9 years.
Now I have it. Sorry.
It's what I said, and then she said.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Now I got it.
There's another way of looking at this, put it in perspective. So you have a vacant piece of property. We have vacant pieces of property all through the city. They're just sitting there. They're not doing anything. Is anyone forcing them or upset that they're not doing anything? You can't do anything. That property owner has the choice of doing something. So you actually have property owners that have gone through the process to better their property. Now it has an entitlement that creates value to the property. They've done it for some reason. So
But it just
How do
seems like
you-
it creates more value for the business, the property owner, than it does for us as a community.
it's a business.
Oh, no, that's fine. I'm not
So, but it
demonizing them
creates-
for
it
being
creates- it
businessmen.
creates
I'm just saying,
value.
how does it create value for us when a vacant lot is entitled and then it sits vacant and then 9 years later they sell the property to another business? We have to start over and go through this whole process again. It's city time, it's our time, it's the public's time. So how is there value to us? I understand how
They pay
they
for
make
that
money.
time.
They're not paying for our time.
No,
Well,
but if I could just say that, I
Or the public's time.
understand the concern that's being expressed. I really do. It's just that the MAP Act is very clearly written. It allows for these time extensions. They're non-discretionary time extensions. So really the question is, in what manner do you want to parcel out those non-discretionary time extensions? I think what's being proposed is 2 times, 3 years each. You can break it up however the commission wants to do that. It's just, from staff's perspective, piecemealing and 1-year time extensions is just not the most efficient use, because it's permissible.
So 9 years is what's in the MAP Act.
So the MAP Act allows an initial approval, tentative map approval, up to 3 years, and then it provides for
3 years.
additional non-discretionary time extensions. And it's very clear, the MAP Act says it's non-discretionary time extensions.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but we currently have
Yep.
2 years and then 3 1-year extensions, which is 5 years. We're moving to 3 years plus 2 3-year extensions, which is 9 years. So I'm saying, is it that the number of years has changed, and in order for us to be in compliance with state law, we have to do 9 years, or do we have discretion over that?
Or were we simply wrong in our original code?
The MAP Act has language in there that says up to the legislative body to determine how it wants to divide those times.
I think you can't go more than 9 years, but if you want to go, you could divide up you could have just like 1 3-year extension if that's what you want. You just can't go beyond a total of 6 years after the first approval.
Okay.
But one thing that I was talking to Cynthia about this. So one of the other things that we need to consider that's in this part of the code, but it relates to the other part of the code, is we want the code not to be so fragmented that, one section does it this way and another section does it this way. So one of the things that you need to remember, or we need to remember, is the PUD section that we just reviewed requires a conditional use permit to be filed along with the map. And sometimes a conditional use permit is just filed along with a tract because of what they're doing. So when the conditional use permit is attached to a subdivision, it automatically kind of gets the same kind of time extension, because you wouldn't want the CUP to travel a different path than the tract map. But I think we want to try to get the two sections to be consistent so that they're not in conflict with each other. And right now, they kind of are, because I think in the CUP section and the design review section, it says you're allowed 2 years and then 3 1-year extensions. So
But didn't we have something else that came recently, either in an earlier section or even just to Planning Commission in general, where we did change the initial period and then the number of years for the extension? Am I hallucinating? I thought we agreed on something similar to this recently for another.
wasn't that in the steering committee?
No.
No, that was here.
It may have been for permits and approval in Division 7 when we brought that forward.
Yeah, so, because I think I was thinking it was 2 and then 3 1-year extensions. So if we're
For the
trying to be
design
consistent.
review and the CUP.
Right, so are we trying to be consistent across all sections? Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying the CUP for this particular thing is now going to be out of sync if we change it?
I don't think, I misspoke.
I think maybe I can add some clarity to this. What I think Commissioner Malakoff is trying to explain is that all applications that are associated with something that has a different time frame, they should be synced up. And I think that's something that we can adjust or we can address simply by some language in the code overall, that when this occurs, it could happen with the CUP and a track map, or it could happen with the CUP and some other permit that goes along with that. And any time that those timelines don't sync up, they just should automatically sync either to the longer time frame or the shorter time frame.
Let me see if I can summarize where we are, because I think from Interim Director Molina, we are definite that there is no discretion on essentially a 9-year period, correct? That's in the act.
No, that's not what she said. There's no discretion on us denying the extensions, but we can choose how many and for how long.
And it can be shorter than 9 years.
Yes. And it doesn't have to be 9 years, you said.
It could be, it could be
6.
7 years,
Correct.
It could be 6 years. That's where we have
or 6
discretion.
years, yeah.
Yeah, Charlie, if I could offer, it sounds like there are some really good questions about sort of the parameters of what the city can and can't do with respect to the Subdivision Map Act and, expirations and time extensions. What might be helpful is if our office just prepares a quick summary of, what can be tinkered with and what can't be. And we'd be happy to get that to the commission for their consideration.
Mr. Chair, what I was trying to say was I certainly would agree with you that if you did a drive-through, that it shouldn't be extended up to 9 years. That's ridiculous. But I think the initial period, whatever we decide that initial period is, that should be the same across all entitlements. Then the amount of extensions can be different, but they should have the same initial time period. So like if you go 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, then it should be 2 years for the CUPs and the design reviews also. That's what I was trying to say. But I certainly think that here on subdivisions, we should give them the most discretion. And then for the CUPs and the design reviews that are on their own, probably a very much less amount. Because then you're kind of dealing with a situation with like, either do it or don't.
Right. Okay.
But with the map, it's just, there's so much involved with the Department of Real Estate and all of the things that you need to do with the financing and how housing is just so difficult right now.
And staff are comfortable with this proposal because it reduces unnecessary work. We would be.
Well, it's and really, the MAP Act limits our ability anyway. But why don't we allow staff to provide you some clarity as far as how the MAP Act is written? I believe there's not really a lot of discretion on time extensions. But we're also hearing the concern with too long of a time extension. Even if the MAP Act says you can have up to 6 years, there's still a concern with how we portion out those time extensions. So let us go back based upon this discussion and come back with some process for what those chunks should look like.
Sounds good. Okay. Moving on to your last question, I think.
Okay. The last question is, so after a tentative map is approved, minor corrections or amendments can be granted by the director, provided those changes are consistent with that original approval, the intent and the spirit of the original approval, and all applicable codes and policies. So the question is, would it be appropriate for the director to allow a limited deviation in the number of lots, units, or building sites? So, for example, maximum 10%, provided those findings can still be made, that the changes are consistent with the intent and spirit of the original approval, and all codes and policies are met. And kind of the reason this is a question why staff wants to explore it is that in some cases, even a well laid out subdivision can experience some unexpected challenges when you get into it, and that can impact how land is planned and to be laid out. So we'd like your input on that question.
So I'd be very quick on this question for you and say, 10% sounds
Okay.
fine. But I have 2 items after that. So let's
Okay.
just check on this first. I didn't want everyone to get excited that we were finished.
Agree on 10.
Okay.
Agree.
Yeah.
And use the findings that we already approved in the administrative deviation, deviation. We already approved findings for that the director would use for other minor variances. You called it something different, but those findings could be used here.
Okay. So you got the 10%. Now, the 2 other things I just wanted to mention quite quickly. 9195030G, which you know off by heart, is about sidewalks and not requiring sidewalks in subdivisions, and that concerns me. I've seen, for example, CIDs that have 0 sidewalks, even though they have a clubhouse and a park and other facilities that people need to get to. And for me, that always looks like I see somebody standing up. That always looks to me like a hazard for the residents. And I understand sometimes that's required, either only one side or no sidewalk, because of space utilization, but I still think that is something that we should take note of.
Those are only allowed in gated communities
Right.
where the community regulates itself. So in any public street, we'll have sidewalks in new subdivisions.
Are we not allowed to set a standard for a CID, a gated community?
We've always certainly it can be imposed, but we've always left, gated communities a little more liberal, especially even in their street widths, making, they narrow up their streets sometimes to optimize their space. Parking only on one side of the street, obviously, or 0 sides of the street if they're too narrow. Sidewalks, typically option. We make them have sidewalks coming in from the sidewalk, getting into their gated community, but once they're in the community, they can use the streets as path of travel.
So I would just say that staff should consider whether we do require at least one sidewalk in an HOA where there are common facilities for people to get to. And they would have to design around that. So that would be my suggestion, we look at that. The other thing that I wanted to mention is just cleaning up, but 9-200-010, it talks just about providing access for cable TV. And I think that's left over from previous drafts or something, or the previous regulations. But we have things like fiber optic and other types of facilities. So we need to generalize that into a list of utilities that must be provided.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Corella, I found something that I think you might find interesting. In 950040, I don't think it's clear that the owner of property has to maintain the sidewalk and the landscaping adjacent to the street. And that's always been what people have to do. So like if the sidewalk buckles in front of your property, you have to fix it.
We've vetted this one out significantly, even with the city council. We've had workshops. It's called the duty to maintain. Do you know the code right off the bat? But the code basically states, and it's in about 99% of the municipal codes in the state. Even Beverly Hills is very similar to ours. You have the duty to maintain to the street line. And the street line, we've even pared down, and it goes down to where does the asphalt portion or the driving surface of the street end, and then that's where your duty is to maintain your frontage. So technically in our city, where the gutter starts, and the curb, and everything behind there is your duty to maintain.
I agree with you, and my HOA had to pay for somebody's injury that on a sidewalk that was damaged. So I agree with you. I didn't like it, but I agree with you. But what I was saying is I think somewhere in 95040, it's not clear to what he just said. So
it may need to reference the other code because the other code is very strong.
yeah, so look into that with our staff.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Two hopefully quick questions. The urban lot split section, it says that a maximum of 2 dwelling units of any kind, including primary units and ADUs/JDUs, shall be permitted on a lot created through an urban lot split. So I was just wondering, since the new ADU laws at the state level that we just had to update our ADU laws for seem to allow for more than 2, is this, I know you mentioned some of this lot split language comes from the state. Is this the state saying in a lot split you're restricted in how many ADUs and units you can have? Or is this our language?
No, that's the state.
Okay, so they do restrict if you do split a lot.
Yes.
You're not going to get 6.
Yep.
Only 4. Okay.
Yep.
And then this, in general, the subdivision design standards seemed not very comprehensive. And I was just wondering, is that because they're going to fall under our general objective design standards that we have not yet reviewed? Or is this intended to be all of it?
This, as far as I know, and Brent's going to jump in because he's writing other parts of it, except for minimum lot size, lot configuration, I believe this is it. But I do know minimum lot size and lot configuration is in the base district standards.
It is in the base district standards, but the objective standards themselves are not necessarily what's in here. So what's in the subdivision ordinance, that's to the extent that's being proposed. The objective standards themselves get into more building massing. There is some site orientation, but it's more architectural design as what the objective standards are. So it's not getting into some of what you would find here in the subdivision.
Okay, so I guess my question is just, are there additional citywide objective design standards that are going to also apply to this? Or is, if you're doing a subdivision, this is all you have to comply with?
These are the design standards for the subdivision. When you build something on there, you have to comply with the shading, the landscaping.
Okay, that's what,
all that.
okay,
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to make sure, thanks.
Any other questions? No. Okay. Moving to the city clerk, do we have any public comments?
We have no public comment.
Okay, then we are done with this item. Moving on to, and thank you to the consultants and to staff. Oh, and yes, would you
One
like to
minor
say a
thing?
word or two?
One minor thing, I just wanted to give a brief update on what the next steps are for Planning Commission, so we're all aware.
Yeah.
Steering Committee is meeting next Monday. They're going to review Division 4. Division 4 is standards for specific uses. So we just completed general development standards apply everywhere, regardless of zoning district. Division 4, if you have specific standards for car washes or fast food or grocery stores or whatever the like, there's a whole host of uses. That's what will be discussed with Steering Committee. The week after that, March 4th, we're going to come back here. So Planning Commission will then review Division 4 as well. There will be a break in between. After March, we will come back to Planning Commission April 22nd. April 22nd is the objective standards. That's what
When will the
comes
steering
forward.
committee get the next section?
Steering Committee will get Division 4 on Monday.
That's when the meeting is, the agenda for that meeting should go out tomorrow.
And are you
Wait,
going to copy us on that?
It's going out tomorrow for our Monday meeting, because somebody just said Monday for Monday, and I was.
Right.
Okay, so tomorrow we'll have, and we could start working on that. Okay.
Steering Committee gets Division 4 on Monday. Planning Commission will get Division 4 on March 4th.
Let me just
You mean
clarify.
on the
what I think
agenda. We're asking when will we
He's
receive
talking
it?
about.
Oh, he's
the
talking about the
minutes.
actual packet.
That's why I jumped in, sorry.
I'm talking about the meetings,
Yeah.
which
I
is,
was talking about getting ready for the meeting.
Yes, that's why I jumped in there. So Commissioner Malakoff and planning commissioners, yes, I'll send out the agenda for steering committee's Monday meeting tomorrow for the division on Division 4.
And
which
we'll
is
get the proposed, the vice chair and I will get the proposed,
We'll get the packet.
Yep.
there's a packet that, we'll all get the packet. on
Steering
tomorrow.
committee members will get the packet, the planning commission will get the division.
Yes, right.
Okay.
The- Good.
and lastly, I'll say that we're still on track for a public review draft coming out in the middle of May, followed by community engagement, which will occur in June. So the code is still on track for adoption in the fall. So I appreciate everybody taking the time. I know these are long meetings.
Thank you. Okay, so I will now move us to item 3, commissioners' comments. Any comments from commissioners? Yes.
I just want to, on the record, compliment City Clerk Burton. These speakers are just, not speakers, people, these speakers that are sitting next to us, because this is the first time I've really clearly heard what everybody was saying. And I just can't thank you enough, because there were certain people, I just couldn't hear them, and I didn't want to say anything. Can you please repeat that? So this was just great. Everything was crystal clear. So the city clerk's office, bravo.
Well, it was an effort by the IT department.
City clerk and IT
With the
and
input, it
whoever
was-
else is
So I will relay the
responsible.
message. Thank you.
Thank you. See no other comments from commissioners. City Attorney.
Good evening, Chair. No comments for me, but it's nice to see everyone.
Okay, item 5, staff comments.
Chair, I don't have any comments, other than our transmittals are in the packet. If you have any questions, just free to ask.
All right, thank you. In which case, I'll now adjourn this meeting. Thank you.
That's okay.